The whiskey burned less than it used to. That was the problem with grief, Colonel James Hawthorne thought as he raised the glass to his lips. Eventually, even the pain became familiar. Even the numbness felt like home. The bar in downtown Tucson was the kind of place where questions died before they reached your table. Dim lighting that forgave the lines on a man's face. Music low enough to drown in your thoughts, but not so loud you had to pretend to be social. The air smelled of stale beer and decades of cigarette smoke that no amount of cleaning could erase. James had been coming here for 5 years, ever since Margaret's funeral, and the bartender still didn't know his name. That was exactly how he wanted it. 67 years old. The number sat in his mind like a verdict. 67 years of decisions, most of them wrong. 67 years of trying to do the right thing and watching it blow up in his face anyway. 67 years, and the only number that mattered to him was 4. 4 men dead because of him. He pulled the photograph from his wallet, edges soft from handling. Margaret smiled up at him, frozen at 43, forever younger than he was now. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer had taken her in 6 months. The doctors said she didn't suffer much at the end. They were lying, but he appreciated the kindness. Before she died, she'd gripped his hand with what little strength she had left and said something that haunted him more than any nightmare from Iraq ever could. "Don't die with me, Jim. Live, love again, I give you permission." Permission. As if love was something you could authorize, like a military operation. As if his heart was capable of anything beyond this slow, grinding fade to black. The television above the bar flickered to life, some news anchor's voice cutting through the ambient noise. James wasn't paying attention until he heard the words that made the entire bar go quiet. 15 years after first contact, the Sentinel Accord has entered its most ambitious phase yet. Today, the Xathan delegation arrives on Earth for the planet's first full-scale diplomatic exchange program. The screen showed a ship descending through Arizona's copper sky, sleek and silver, moving with a grace that made human spacecraft look like falling bricks. James felt something stir in his chest. Not hope. He'd killed that particular feeling years ago, but maybe curiosity. Maybe the faint memory of what it felt like to be surprised by the universe. The Xathan. He'd read about them, of course. Everyone had. A species from a world 40 light-years away, older than humanity by 10,000 years, wiser by measures humans couldn't comprehend. They'd made contact in 2033, not with weapons or demands, but with a simple message. "We see you. You are not alone. Would you like to talk?" The revelation that humanity wasn't alone in the universe should have changed everything. For some people, it had. For James, it was just another piece of news in a world that kept spinning regardless of whether you were ready for it or not. He finished his drink, the smoky bourbon leaving a familiar ache in his throat, dropped 2 20s on the bar, and walked out into the desert night. The air was cool for September, carrying that peculiar scent of creosote and dust that meant monsoon season was finally ending. Above him, stars scattered across the sky like spilled diamonds, and for the first time in 5 years, James looked up and wondered which one of them held the Xathan homeworld. Then he went home to his empty house and tried not to dream about Iraq. The nightmare came anyway, same as it always did. The cockpit, the target coordinates, the voice of his weapons officer, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, calm and professional. "Target confirmed, Colonel, weapons hot, your call." And then his own voice, steady despite the ice in his veins. "Fire." The explosion bloomed on his instruments before he saw it with his eyes. The realization 3 seconds too late that intelligence had been wrong. Not an ammunition depot. A refugee collection point. His own crew, scrambling to eject. The aircraft breaking apart. Chen's scream cutting off mid-breath as the cockpit separated and tumbled toward the desert floor. The sound of metal tearing. The smell of burning fuel. the taste of blood in his mouth as G forces through him against his restraints. He woke up at 3:17 in the morning, same as always, sheets soaked with sweat, Margaret's side of the bed still empty after 5 years. His hands were shaking. They always shook after the dream. 4 people, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Captain Marcus Reyes, Sergeant David Kim, Corporal Jennifer Walsh. 4 names he recited every morning like a prayer, like penance, like the only thing keeping him tethered to the ground. He'd saved 340 civilians that day by destroying what they'd believed was an enemy weapons cache. The medal they gave him was in a box somewhere in the garage. He'd never looked at it after the ceremony. The University of Arizona had been kind enough to give him a teaching position when he retired from the Air Force. Military history, which was a polite way of saying they wanted someone who'd actually been there to tell the kids what war really looked like. He was good at it, in a grim sort of way. Good at explaining the mathematics of violence, the calculus of acceptable losses, the way decisions made in microseconds could echo for decades. What he wasn't good at was living. That particular skill had died with Margaret, or maybe before, on a desert morning in Iraq when he'd chosen 300 strangers over 4 friends. His daughter Emily hadn't spoken to him in 10 years. She was a doctor now, oncologist, living in Phoenix with her 8-year-old daughter Sy'ra. He knew this not because Emily told him, but because he still had friends who kept tabs on these things, who understood that sometimes a father needed to know his child was alive even if she'd written him off as dead. She had her reasons. After Margaret died, he'd crawled into a bottle and stayed there for 2 years, had shown up drunk to her medical school graduation, had said things, done things, been things that no daughter should have to witness in her father. By the time he'd sobered up, she'd already built a wall so high he couldn't see over it. He didn't blame her. He'd have done the same. The morning coffee tasted like motor oil, but he drank it anyway, standing at the kitchen window, watching the sun climb over the Catalina Mountains. 72 degrees already, going to be a scorcher. The kind of day where the desert shimmered and the air felt thick enough to swim through. His phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Marcus Webb, his colleague in the history department. Mandatory attendance at the Zathan Symposium today. Dean's orders. We're something that doesn't make us look like barbarians. James almost smiled. Webb was 58, British, and had lost his wife to what he called an alien-related incident, though he never elaborated. The man had a mordant sense of humor and a deep suspicion of anything not born on Earth. They got along well, 2 widowers floating through academia like ghosts at a party they hadn't wanted to attend. He texted back, "Define barbarian." The response came immediately, "You, in cargo pants." This time James did smile, brief as lightning. He finished his coffee, showered, shaved, put on the one suit he owned that didn't smell like mothballs, and drove to campus. The university had transformed overnight. Banners everywhere proclaiming welcome Zathan delegation in English, and what he assumed was their language-flowing script that looked like water frozen mid-cascade. Students clustered in excited groups, phones out, everyone trying to catch a glimpse of the visitors. Security was tight, men and women in dark suits with earpieces, federal agents trying to blend in and failing spectacularly. The smell of freshly cut grass mixed with the electric anticipation in the air. The symposium was being held in the Centennial Hall, the largest auditorium on campus, capacity 2,000. James found Webb near the back, looking professionally miserable in a blazer that had seen better decades. "This is absurd," Webb muttered as James sat down. "We're academics, not diplomats. What are we supposed to contribute to interstellar relations? A strongly worded dissertation." James didn't answer. He was watching the stage, where a podium had been set up alongside what looked like translation equipment, sleek devices that probably cost more than his annual salary. The auditorium was filling fast, a mix of faculty, students, journalists, and what he recognized as military brass in civilian clothing. Everyone wanted to see them. The aliens. The proof that humanity's long loneliness was finally over. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd, that particular quality of silence that comes just before something changes forever. The dean stepped up to the podium, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and a voice that could cut glass. Today represents a historic milestone in human development. For 15 years, we have known we are not alone. Today, we take the next step. Today, we learn what it means to be neighbors in this vast cosmos. Applause, polite and nervous. James felt his jaw tighten. Neighbors, as if proximity was the same thing as friendship. As if sharing a galaxy meant sharing values, understanding, common ground. And now, the dean continued, "It is my profound honor to introduce Ambassador Sy'ra Thel'nara of the Xathan Diplomatic Corps. She comes to us not as a stranger, but as a fellow traveler in this universe we all call home. She comes to speak about peace after war, hope after loss, and the bridges we build across the spaces between stars." The stage entrance opened. James leaned forward despite himself. She walked like water, fluid and inevitable, each step measured and certain. Humanoid, but not human. That was the first thing that struck him. The similarities were there, 2 arms, 2 legs, bipedal motion, but rendered in a way that made it clear evolution had taken a different path on her world. Her skin was pale blue, the color of winter ice reflecting moonlight, with a faint luminescence that caught the auditorium lights and threw them back softer, gentler. Silver traceries ran beneath the surface like veins of starlight, pulsing almost imperceptibly with what might have been a heartbeat or might have been something else entirely. Her hair fell past her shoulders in waves of platinum white, moving as if underwater even when she stood still. But it was her eyes that stopped his breath. Deep amethyst, without visible pupils, just infinite gradations of purple fading to black at the edges, holding depths that suggested she'd seen things humans couldn't imagine. She was tall, maybe 5'9", slender in a way that suggested grace rather than fragility. She wore robes that shifted between blue and silver depending on the angle of light, and when she reached the podium and placed her hands on either side of it, James saw that her fingers were longer than human normal, tapering to points that weren't quite claws but weren't quite nails either. Beautiful, the word came unbidden. Not human beautiful, something else. Something that made his chest ache in a way he hadn't felt since Margaret smiled at him across their kitchen table a lifetime ago. She stood silent for a long moment, those amethyst eyes sweeping across the audience, and James had the irrational feeling that she could see through every face, every mask, every carefully constructed wall, straight down to the broken parts underneath. When she spoke, her voice was low, textured with harmonics that suggested she was speaking in 2 registers at once. The translation devices picked it up, rendered it into English with only a slight delay, but James found himself listening to her actual voice beneath the translation, trying to parse meaning from pure sound. It reminded him of wind through canyon rocks, of water over smooth stones, of sounds that existed before language had words. "Thank you for welcoming me to your world. I know that for many of you, my presence here is unusual, strange, perhaps frightening. That is natural. I am not what you expected the universe to contain." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter from the audience. She waited it out, patient as stone. "I come to speak about peace, but before I can do that honestly, I must speak about war, about the cost of violence, about the weight of decisions made in moments of crisis that we carry for the rest of our lives." James felt something cold slide down his spine. 20 of your years ago, I was a fleet commander in the Xathan Defense Forces during what we call the Korvax conflict. My orders were clear. Protect our colony worlds. Neutralize hostile forces. Do whatever necessary to ensure our people survived. Her hands tightened on the podium. Even from the back row, James could see the silver traceries in her skin pulse faster, brighter. Intelligence reported an enemy weapons facility. High-value target. If destroyed, it would save thousands of our civilians. I gave the order to fire. We destroyed the facility, and then we learned the truth. The auditorium was absolutely silent now. Even the reporters had stopped typing. It was not a weapons facility. It was a forward operating base for a rescue mission. 47 soldiers were there, attempting to extract hostages from a civilian detention center. Among those 47 were my husband, Thel'kar Rhinoth, and our son, Ryan, who was 17 years old. Someone in the front row gasped. James felt his throat close. The explosion killed 41 of them instantly. My husband managed to get our son into an emergency escape pod before the ship's reactor failed. But the pod was damaged. It drifted into uncharted space. For 20 years, we searched. We never found them. 3 years ago, we stopped searching. Her voice hadn't wavered, hadn't broken, but James heard the fault lines in it, the places where grief had worn channels so deep they'd become part of the landscape. He recognized that tone. He'd heard it in his own voice for 15 years. I tell you this not for sympathy, but for understanding. I know what it means to make a decision that destroys the people you love. I know what it means to wake up every morning and wonder if you deserve to breathe when they cannot. I know what it means to carry the weight of good intentions that led to unspeakable consequences. James was standing before he realized he'd moved. Half a dozen people around him turned to look, annoyed, but he didn't care. He was moving toward the exit, heart pounding, hands shaking, the walls closing in. Margaret's voice in his head, "Don't die with me." Live. But how was he supposed to live when this alien woman had just described his existence with surgical precision? He made it to the hallway before the panic attack hit. Leaned against the wall, breathing hard, counting backwards from 100 like the VA therapist had taught him. 99, 98, 97. The cool concrete against his back, the smell of floor polish and old paint, the distant sound of her voice still carrying through the doors. "Are you unwell?" The voice came from behind him, low and harmonious, and James turned to find Ambassador Sy'ra Thel'nara standing 10 feet away, having somehow left the stage and followed him without making a sound. Up close, she was even more striking. The luminescence of her skin created a soft glow in the dim hallway, and he could see patterns in it now, those silver traceries like frost on a window, intricate as fingerprints and probably just as unique. She smelled faintly of ozone, and something floral he couldn't identify, like rain in a garden that had never existed on Earth. "I'm fine," he managed. His voice came out rough, damaged. "Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt your speech." "You did not interrupt. I was nearly finished." Her head tilted slightly to the left, a gesture that was definitely not human, bird-like in its precision. "You left because of what I said, about the choice I made." It wasn't a question. James felt something in his chest crack open, some calcified thing that had been sealed shut for 15 years. "I made a choice like that once," he heard himself say. 4 people died. They were my friends, my responsibility. I gave the order and they died. Sy'ra stepped closer, close enough that he could see his reflection in those amethyst depths. How long ago? 15 years, 2 months, 11 days. He'd never said it out loud before, never admitted he was counting. "And you have been dying with them ever since." It wasn't a question this time either. James looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone who understood in a way no human therapist, no well-meaning friend, no grieving daughter ever could. She'd walked the same path, carried the same weight. breathed the same air in that specific hell reserved for people who killed the ones they were trying to save. "Yes," he said simply. "Yes, I have." They stood in silence, two people from different worlds, different species, different evolutionary paths, united by the specific gravity of guilt. Somewhere down the hall, he could hear the muffled sound of applause as someone else took the stage, continuing the symposium without its featured speaker. "My people have a word," Sy'ra said quietly. "Thelmos. It means to forgive and to carry simultaneously. The understanding that some actions cannot be undone, but also need not destroy us. That we can acknowledge our errors and still choose to continue living." "We don't have a word like that in English," James said. "No," she smiled, faint as starlight. "You do not. Perhaps that is why you suffer more than necessary." Another silence, this one less suffocating. James found himself cataloging details about her without meaning to. The way her robes moved like they were alive, responding to air currents he couldn't feel. The faint scent she carried, ozone and rain and growing things. The fact that she was several inches shorter than him but seemed to occupy more space somehow, as if she existed in more dimensions than he could perceive. "Would you," she said slowly, as if testing each word, "like to have coffee? I am told it is a human custom, when two people wish to continue talking." James stared at her. Coffee. The alien ambassador was asking him to get coffee. The absurdity of it broke through his panic like light through clouds. "I know a place," he said, "but I have to warn you, the coffee's not exactly diplomatic venue material." Sy'ra's smile widened fractionally, and her skin pulsed brighter for just a moment. "Good. I have had enough diplomacy for one day." They took his truck, an ancient Ford Ranger that had seen better decades, and if she found it primitive or uncomfortable, she didn't show it. She sat in the passenger seat with perfect posture, hands folded in her lap, watching the desert landscape roll past with what seemed like genuine interest. The engine rattled at stoplights. The AC wheezed. The radio was stuck on a country station playing songs about heartbreak and whiskey. "Your world is very brown," she observed. "We're in a desert. Other parts have more green, more water." "Ah, Zathan has 3 suns. Much of our world is in perpetual daylight. We have places of shadow, but they are rare and precious. I imagine you would find it overwhelming." "Probably," James agreed. "We're built for one sun. Anything else would feel wrong." "Yes," she turned to look at him, and he felt the weight of her attention like a physical thing. "That is the challenge, is it not? All the ways we are built differently. All the assumptions that no longer hold." The coffee shop was a hole-in-the-wall place on the edge of downtown, the kind of establishment that survived on loyalty rather than quality. The owner, a grizzled Vietnam vet named Carlos, didn't even blink when James walked in with an alien. Just nodded and poured 2 cups of his signature burnt offering, the smell of over-roasted beans thick in the air. They sat in the back corner, away from the windows, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Sy'ra lifted the coffee cup with both hands, studying it like an artifact, then took a careful sip. Her expression didn't change, but James saw the silver traceries in her skin pulse slower, darker. "This beverage is aggressively mediocre," she said. "Yeah," James agreed, "but it's honest mediocrity, not trying to be anything it's not." Sy'ra set the cup down gently. "I appreciate that quality. We have something similar on Zathan. A drink made from fermented moss that tastes like regret but clears the mind beautifully." "Sounds delightful." "It is not." She smiled again, and James realized that when she did, her skin seemed to pulse with light from within, like bioluminescence in deep ocean creatures. "But we drink it anyway, because some rituals are more important than pleasure." They talked for 3 hours, not about war or guilt or the weight of impossible choices, but about smaller things. Margaret, and how she'd loved hummingbirds, had kept feeders all around their house in the suburbs before they moved to the desert. The way she hummed while cooking, always slightly off-key. How she could never remember where she put her car keys, but could recite entire poems from memory. Thel'nara, who had been a musician before he became a soldier, who could play an instrument called a velthar that produced sounds in frequencies humans couldn't hear. How he grew exotic plants in their home, turning their living quarters into a garden that smelled of things Earth had never known. How he believed the universe was fundamentally good, even when all evidence suggested otherwise. Emily and the way she'd stopped talking to him, not out of hate but out of self-preservation. How she'd been 12 when he first deployed, 18 when Margaret died, and how somewhere in those years, he'd lost her to his own grief and rage and inability to be present. Ryan, who had wanted to study xenobiology, who had died at 17, never knowing how many species were waiting to be discovered. Who had his father's gentle nature and his mother's fierce intelligence. Who Sy'ra had named after her own father, a tradition among her people. When James finally looked at his watch, it was past 6 in the evening. The sun was setting, painting the desert sky in shades of copper and gold, the light slanting through the window and making Sy'ra's skin glow like she was lit from within. "I should get you back," he said. "They're probably looking for you." Sy'ra glanced toward the window, toward the dying light. "Let them look. I am not ready to return to being an ambassador yet." So they sat a while longer, watching the sun set on a world that was hers by choice and his by birth, and James felt something he hadn't felt in 5 years. Not happiness, not yet, but maybe the memory of what happiness used to feel like. The faint echo of it, like a song heard from far away. The Xathan delegation had set up quarters in a university facility on the north side of campus, a series of prefabricated structures that probably cost more than the entire history department's annual budget. Security was everywhere, both human and what James assumed were Xathan guards, tall figures in dark armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Sy'ra's personal guard, a male Xathan who introduced himself as Commander Chiron, met them at the entrance. He was taller than Sy'ra, broader in the shoulders, with darker blue skin that suggested either age or a different regional variant. His eyes were silver rather than amethyst, and when he looked at James, there was no warmth in them whatsoever, only the cold assessment of a soldier evaluating a potential threat. "Ambassador," his voice was deeper than Sy'ra's, resonant as a struck bell. "The council has been attempting to reach you for 3 hours. "I was having coffee," Sy'ra replied calmly, "with Colonel Hawthorne. We were discussing comparative grief rituals." Chiron's expression didn't change, but James sensed disapproval radiating off him like heat from asphalt. "The council requires your report on the symposium." "I will provide it tomorrow. Tonight I am fatigued." It was a dismissal, gentle but absolute. Chiron inclined his head fractionally, shot one more suspicious glance at James, and withdrew into the compound. James noticed the guard moved without sound, his boots making no noise on the concrete. Predator quiet, military training that transcended species. "He does not trust you," Sy'ra said conversationally. "Can't blame him. I'm a stranger, possibly dangerous. Definitely got you to ditch your security detail for substandard coffee and emotional honesty." Yes, she turned to face him fully, and in the gathering darkness, her skin's luminescence was more pronounced, casting soft blue-white light across her features. "You are all of those things, and yet I find myself wanting to do this again." James felt his pulse quicken. Coffee. Conversation. Company. The company of someone who understands that living with guilt is not the same as being destroyed by it. He should say no. This was an alien ambassador, a woman from a species that lived twice as long as humans, with customs and biology he couldn't begin to understand. This was complicated in ways that made his failed marriage to Margaret look simple. But Margaret's voice was in his head again. Live, Jim. Love again. I give you permission. Tomorrow night, he said. Same place, same aggressively mediocre coffee. Sy'ra's skin brightened, that bioluminescent pulse that he was starting to recognize as pleasure or maybe hope. Tomorrow night. Yes. She turned to go, then paused at the entrance to the compound. James. Yeah. Thank you for listening, for understanding, for not treating me like an ambassador or an alien or a curiosity, just as someone who made a terrible choice and is trying to figure out how to keep living anyway. That goes both ways, he said quietly. She nodded once, sharp and decisive, and disappeared into the compound. James stood there for a long moment, watching the door close behind her, feeling like he'd just stepped off a cliff and wasn't sure yet if he was falling or flying. He drove home through the desert night, past strip malls and gas stations and all the ordinary infrastructure of human civilization, and realized that somewhere in the last 6 hours, something fundamental had shifted. The world still looked the same. The stars still scattered across the sky in their familiar patterns. But he felt different. Lighter. Like maybe the weight he'd been carrying wasn't as heavy as he'd convinced himself it was. At home, he stood in the kitchen where Margaret used to make her famous scrambled eggs, where they danced to old Sinatra records on vinyl, where she'd told him about the cancer and he'd tried not to let her see him break. He pulled out his phone, stared at Emily's number for a long time, then put it away. Not yet. Some bridges took longer to build than others. Instead, he went to his study, found the box he'd been avoiding for 15 years and opened it. Inside were the commendations, the medals, the official letters of condolence for the families of Lieutenant Chen, Captain Reyes, Sergeant Kim, and Corporal Walsh. There was also a smaller envelope, one he'd never opened, with Margaret's handwriting on it, for when you're ready to forgive yourself. His hands shook as he broke the seal. Inside was a single piece of paper, her familiar looping script. Jim, by the time you read this, I'll be gone, and you'll have spent who knows how long punishing yourself for things you can't change. So let me tell you something while I still can. You are not your worst decision. You are not the sum of your mistakes. You are the man who sits with me every night while I'm dying and pretends not to be terrified. You are the man who holds my hand when the pain gets bad and tells me stories about the life we were supposed to have. You are the man I fell in love with 30 years ago, and you are still that man, even when you don't believe it. Forgive yourself, not because you deserve it, but because holding on to guilt won't bring anyone back. Love. Let yourself be human. Let yourself be happy. I love you, I always will, but I'm giving you permission to love someone else too when you're ready. Don't spend the rest of your life in this tomb we've built. There's still time. There's always time until there isn't. Forever yours, Margaret. James sat at his desk until past midnight, tears running down his face, Margaret's letter in his hands, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled at the stars. The sound carried through the open window, wild and lonely and somehow comforting in its ancient familiarity. The next 3 weeks became a rhythm. Mornings, he taught his classes, going through the motions of explaining military history to students who thought war was something that happened in movies. Afternoons, he graded papers and attended faculty meetings and pretended to care about budget allocations and curriculum changes. Evenings, he met Sy'ra at the coffee shop, and they talked. Not about the big things at first. That came later. At first, it was the small stuff. She told him about Xathan architecture, buildings that grew from engineered seeds rather than being constructed, living structures that breathed and adapted to their inhabitants. He told her about baseball, a sport that made no sense to her logical mind, but which he loved anyway for its beautiful pointlessness. She explained the Xathan concept of time, which wasn't linear but cyclical, based on the rotations of their 3 suns. He introduced her to Mexican food, watching with fascination as she tried a tamale, and her skin shifted through 6 different shades of blue before settling on a pale lavender that he learned meant pleasant surprise mixed with mild distress. On their 4th meeting, she asked about Iraq. He'd been expecting it, dreading it, but when the moment came, he found himself telling her everything. The mission parameters, the intelligence failure, the moment of decision, the 4 caskets draped with flags, the medal ceremony where he'd stood wooden and hollow while some general praised his quick thinking and decisive action. The years after, drowning in bourbon and regret. When he finished, Sy'ra was silent for a long time. Then she reached across the table and did something she'd never done before. She touched his hand. The contact was electric, not metaphorically. Actual current ran between them, warm and tingling, and James jerked back instinctively before realizing she hadn't moved. The sensation lingered on his skin, like touching a live wire but without the pain. "I apologize," she said quickly, pulling her hand back. "I should have asked permission. My people, we sense emotion through physical contact. It is invasive. I forgot myself." "What did you feel?" James asked, heart pounding. His hand still tingled where she'd touched it. Sy'ra's eyes darkened to deep purple, almost black. Grief, old and deep as canyons. Guilt, sharp as broken glass. And underneath it all, a wish so strong it was almost a prayer. The wish to have died with them. James couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. She'd seen him, really seen him, straight down to the parts he kept locked away even from himself. It should have felt violating. Instead, it felt like relief. "But I also felt something else," she continued softly. "Something newer. Fragile as dawn, the first stirrings of hope." He should deny it, should pull away, rebuild the walls, protect himself from this impossible thing that was happening between them. Instead, he turned his hand palm up on the table. An offering, an invitation. Sy'ra looked at his hand for a long moment, then slowly, carefully placed her palm against his. The sensation was overwhelming. Not just touch, but something deeper, more fundamental. It was like she was reading him in a language he didn't know he spoke. Every scar, every memory, every moment of joy and pain and regret laid bare. He felt the heat of the Iraqi sun on his face, the smell of aviation fuel, Chen's scream, Margaret's final breath, Emily's tears at the funeral, all of it flowing between them like current through copper wire. But it went both ways. He could feel her too, or thought he could. The weight of 20 years spent believing she'd murdered her own family. The loneliness of being the only one who understood that particular flavor of guilt. The desperate, aching wish for absolution that would never come. The sound of her son's last breath in the darkness of space. The silence after. And underneath it all, tentative as a bird landing on an outstretched hand, something that felt like recognition. Like finding someone who spoke your native language in a country where you'd been mute for years. They sat like that for 10 minutes, hands pressed together, neither speaking, the coffee shop fading away until there was just this. This connection. This understanding that went beyond words. Carlos brought them fresh cups at some point, didn't comment, just left them there and went back to the counter. When they finally pulled apart, James felt hollowed out and filled up at the same time. Sy'ra's skin was glowing brighter than he'd ever seen it, pulsing with light like a heartbeat made visible. Her pupils, if she had pupils, were dilated wide, making her eyes look almost entirely black with just a rim of amethyst at the edges. "This is dangerous," she said, but she didn't sound afraid, just certain. "Yeah," James agreed. "It is. I have not felt this way since Thel'nara. I did not think I would feel this way again. I did not think I deserved to." "You don't," he said bluntly. "Neither do I, but maybe that's the point. Maybe the question isn't whether we deserve it. Maybe it's whether we're brave enough to accept it anyway." Sy'ra stood abruptly, and for a moment, James thought he'd pushed too hard, too fast. But then she extended her hand again, not for contact but for help rising. Her movements were fluid, controlled, but he could see the silver traceries in her skin pulsing faster than normal. "Walk with me. Please, I need to move." They left the coffee shop and walked into the desert, past the edge of town where the streetlights gave way to darkness and the stars came out in their full glory. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees since sunset, the desert night air crisp and clean. Sy'ra tilted her head back, studying the sky with an expression James couldn't quite read. "Which one?" he asked. "Which star is Xathen?" She pointed to a constellation he didn't recognize. There, the bright one in what you would call the hunter's shoulder, 40 light years from here. If I left tomorrow at our fastest speed, I would return home in 23 years. I would be 105 years old. Still middle-aged by our standards, but different. Changed. "Would you go back, if you could?" Sy'ra lowered her hand, turned to face him. "Until 28 days ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. I came to Earth expecting to fulfill my obligations and leave, return to Xathen, spend my remaining years in service and solitude. A life sentence I accepted as fair punishment. And now? Now I am standing in a desert on an alien world with a man from a species I barely understand, and I am happier than I have been in 2 decades. Now I am terrified because I know what it is to lose someone you love, and the thought of going through that again makes me want to return to my ship and never come out." "But you're still here," James said. "Yes," her voice was barely a whisper. "I am still here." They stood in the darkness, 2 people from different worlds, and James made a decision. He stepped closer, close enough to see the patterns in her luminescent skin, the way her platinum hair caught starlight and threw it back transformed. Close enough to smell that ozone and rain scent that clung to her. "My wife," he said quietly. "Margaret. Before she died, she told me to live, to love again. She gave me permission, like that was something she needed to grant. And I thought she was crazy, thought grief had broken something in her brain, because how could I possibly love anyone after her?" He paused, gathering courage. "But I think maybe she understood something I didn't. That love isn't a finite resource. That opening your heart again doesn't diminish what came before. That may be the greatest honor we can give the people we lost is to keep living as fully as we can." Sy'ra's eyes were liquid, reflecting starlight. "On Xathen, we believe the soul bonds only once. That love is eternal and exclusive. To love again after losing your partner is considered a betrayal of their memory." "Do you believe that?" James asked. "I did. For 20 years, I believed it absolutely." She stepped closer until they were nearly touching, until 28 days ago. The desert was silent around them, just the faint whisper of wind across sand and the distant cry of a nightbird. James raised his hand slowly, giving her time to move away, to refuse, to remember all the reasons this was impossible. She didn't move. His palm cupped her cheek, and her skin was warm, warmer than human, with that electric tingle that meant she was reading him, understanding him in ways he couldn't explain. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Me too," he said, terrified actually. "Good." She leaned into his touch, her own hand coming up to cover his. "Fear means it matters." They stood like that under the alien stars, and James felt something in his chest that had been broken for 15 years start to knit itself back together. Not healing. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of healing. The first fragile threads of scar tissue forming over the wound. When they finally pulled apart, Sy'ra was glowing so bright she cast shadows across the sand. "James," she said carefully, testing the shape of his name in her mouth. "In Xathen culture, there is a process. A courtship ritual. It takes years, requires family approval, involves ceremonies and exchanges of genetic compatibility data and legal contracts." "That sounds terrible," James said. It is extraordinarily terrible. She smiled, radiant and wild. I propose we ignore it entirely. Yeah. Yes, she took his hand, laced her fingers through his, and the electric warmth of contact flooded through him again. Let us be barbarians together. Let us figure this out as we go. Let us be terrified and do it anyway. Okay, James said, and meant it more than he'd meant anything in 15 years. Okay. They walked back toward town hand in hand, an old soldier and an alien ambassador, and overhead the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent and eternal and somehow, against all logic, suddenly less lonely. The next morning, James woke up without nightmares for the first time in 15 years. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what felt different, and then realized he wanted to get up. Actually wanted to face the day. The sensation was so unfamiliar it took him a moment to recognize it as hope. His phone buzzed, a text from Sy'ra sent at some ungodly hour of the morning. Good morning, James Hawthorne. I did not sleep well last night. I kept thinking about what we said, about being barbarians. I find I am still afraid, but I am also excited, which is a feeling I had forgotten existed. Thank you for reminding me. He read it 3 times, then typed back. Didn't sleep great either, but for good reasons. Coffee tonight. Yes, always yes. He got up, made actual breakfast instead of just coffee, and was halfway through scrambled eggs when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. The voice on the other end was female, young, professional. Colonel Hawthorne? This is Dr. Sarah Chen from Phoenix Memorial Hospital. I'm calling about your granddaughter, Sy'ra Hawthorne. James went cold. The name Chen hit him like a punch. Different Sarah Chen. Had to be, but the name still carried weight. I don't, he started, then stopped. Emily's daughter. His granddaughter, even though he'd never met her, even though Emily had made it clear he wasn't welcome in that part of her life. What's wrong? He asked, dreading the answer. She's been admitted to pediatric intensive care. The doctor's voice was carefully neutral, trained to deliver bad news without falling apart. I'm calling because you're listed as next of kin in our system, and your daughter requested we contact you. What happened? The doctor took a breath. Sy'ra has a rare genetic condition called neural degradation syndrome. It's progressive, fatal. We've been managing it for the past 2 years, but she's taken a turn. Without intervention, she has approximately 3 months. James sat down hard, the kitchen chair scraping across tile. What kind of intervention? There isn't one. Not with current human medical technology. The doctor paused. However, given the Xathan presence on Earth, there have been discussions about whether their medical capabilities might offer options we don't have. James's mind was already racing. Sy'ra, the Xathan, advanced technology, but also diplomatic protocols, non-interference policies, the kind of bureaucratic barriers that killed people while paperwork shuffled. Can I see her? He asked. Your daughter is here. You'd have to ask her permission. Colonel Hawthorne, I'm not supposed to say this, but Emily has been asking about alternative treatments. She's desperate. If you have any connections with the Xathan delegation, now would be the time to use them. The call ended. James sat in his kitchen, eggs going cold on the plate, and thought about choices. About the weight of decisions made in moments of crisis. About an 8-year-old girl he'd never met who was dying while adults argued about protocols and procedures and proper channels. He called Sy'ra. She answered on the first ring. James, her voice was concerned, it is early. Are you well? I need to ask you something, he said. And it's not fair, and I have no right, and you can say no. But I'm asking anyway. Silence on the line. Then, ask. So he told her. About Sy'ra. About the disease. About Emily, who hated him but was desperate enough to let the hospital call him anyway. About a little girl who'd done nothing wrong but have the misfortune of bad genetics and worse timing. When he finished, Sy'ra was quiet for a long moment. Then, the Xathan Council has strict non-interference protocols. We are not permitted to use our medical technology on human patients without extensive approval processes. It would take months, perhaps years. I know, James said, defeated. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked. You did not let me finish. Sy'ra's voice was firm now, decided. There is one exception to the non-interference policy. If the patient is of mixed heritage, part Xathan and part human, then medical intervention is not interference but familial obligation. Sy'ra's not part Xathan, James said. She's fully human. Not if you were married to a Xathan citizen. Then she would legally be family. Then the council would have no grounds to refuse treatment. James's breath caught. You're talking about marriage, us getting married. Yes, Sy'ra didn't sound uncertain at all. Under Xathan law, marriage creates absolute biological kinship. Your granddaughter would become my granddaughter. Her treatment would become my right and obligation. The council could not refuse without violating their own laws. But you'd be lying, committing fraud. You could lose everything. Yes, her voice was calm as deep water. I could be stripped of my position, my citizenship, possibly imprisoned. The diplomatic consequences would be severe. Then we can't, James said, even though it killed him. I can't ask you to do that. You are not asking, Sy'ra said gently. I am offering. James, I have spent 20 years believing I did not deserve to live because I failed to save my family. You are giving me a chance to save yours. Do you understand what that means to me? This is insane, he said, but his hands were shaking, hope and terror warring in his chest. We barely know each other. 28 days. Do you love me? The question hung in the air between them, impossible and inevitable. James thought about Margaret, about permission, about the way Sy'ra's hand felt in his, and the way her presence made the world feel less heavy. Yes, he said. God help me, but yes. Then marry me, Sy'ra said. Marry me and let us save your granddaughter. And if the universe decides to punish us for it, we will face that punishment together. James closed his eyes, thought about 4 caskets draped with flags, thought about Margaret's letter, thought about a little girl dying in a hospital bed while he sat paralyzed by fear and protocol. When? He asked. Today, there is a magistrate in Tucson who is authorized to perform Xathan binding ceremonies. We go now, we marry, and by tonight Sy'ra is legally family. By tomorrow, she is in treatment. I have to tell Emily. Yes, she will think you are insane. She will probably be right. Okay, James said, and started laughing, because what else could you do when your life suddenly pivoted on a single impossible choice? Okay, let's do this. Let's be barbarians. He called Emily. The conversation was exactly as terrible as he'd expected. She accused him of being drunk, of having some kind of breakdown, of exploiting her daughter's illness for attention. But when he explained the legal mechanism, the loophole, the way Xathan law could save Sy'ra where human medicine failed, her anger shifted to desperation. If you're lying to me, she said, voice breaking, if this is some kind of sick joke, I will never forgive you. But if you're serious, if you can really save her, then I don't care what it takes. Do it. I'm serious, James said. I promise you, Em, I'm going to save her. The magistrate's office was in a converted storefront downtown, squeezed between a pawn shop and a bail bondsman. The magistrate herself was a severe woman in her 70s who'd been performing both human and Xathan legal ceremonies since first contact. She looked at James and Sy'ra with the weary expression of someone who'd seen every kind of unlikely couple walk through her door. I'm required to inform you both, she said in a voice like gravel, that Xathan marriage is permanent and absolute. There is no divorce, no annulment. You are bound for life, and under Xathan law, that means until one of you dies. Do you understand? We understand, Sy'ra said. The magistrate turned to James. Colonel Hawthorne, are you aware that by marrying a Xathan citizen, you will be subject to Xathan law in all family matters? That if the council determines this marriage is fraudulent, both of you could face significant penalties. I'm aware, James said. And you're doing this anyway. James looked at Sy'ra, standing beside him in her flowing robes, skin luminous in the fluorescent light. 29 days ago, he'd been a man waiting to die. Now he was about to marry an alien to save his granddaughter's life, and somehow it felt like the sanest thing he'd done in years. Yeah, he said, we're doing this anyway. Then let's get started, the magistrate said, and opened her book. The ceremony was brief, functional, stripped of poetry. James repeated the words he was given, promising eternal commitment, biological kinship, shared fate. Sy'ra did the same, her voice steady, her hand in his radiating that electric warmth that meant she was reading him, understanding him, choosing him anyway. When it was done, the magistrate stamped the papers and handed them over. You're married. Congratulations. Try not to start an interstellar incident. They walked out into the afternoon sun, legally bound, technically insane, and James felt lighter than he had in 15 years. Sy'ra looked up at him, eyes bright with something that might have been fear or might have been joy or might have been both. Well, she said, that happened. Yeah, James agreed. Now comes the hard part. The hard part was telling the Xathan Council that they'd just committed what was probably considered marriage fraud to circumvent medical non-interference protocols. Sy'ra made the call that evening, standing in James's living room with her hands clasped behind her back and her skin flickering through shades of blue that he was learning to read as anxiety. The council appeared as holograms, 5 figures in formal robes, their expressions ranging from shocked to furious. The head counselor, an ancient Xathan female named Thalris, spoke in their language, rapid and harsh. Sy'ra answered in the same tongue, her voice never wavering, even as her skin went nearly white with stress. James didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. He was being discussed, dissected, evaluated. Sy'ra was being accused. The marriage was being questioned. Finally, Thalris switched to English, probably for his benefit. Ambassador Thel'nara, you have bound yourself to a human male for the purpose of circumventing medical non-interference protocols. This is a serious violation of your office and possibly of Xathan law. With respect, council leader, Sy'ra replied, I have bound myself to James Hawthorne because I choose to. The medical situation regarding his granddaughter is a consequence of that choice, not the motivation for it. Do you expect us to believe you fell in love in less than 30 days? I expect you to believe that I am capable of making my own decisions about my life and my heart. Sy'ra's voice was steel wrapped in silk. Sy'ra Hawthorne is a child. She is dying. If we have the technology to save her and choose not to use it because of bureaucratic protocols, then we are complicit in her death. I will not carry that weight. I have carried enough. Silence from the council. Then Thalris said something that made Sy'ra's skin flash bright with shock. James didn't need translation for that. He heard it in English a moment later, from another council member. There is another complication. Ambassador, one you should be aware of before we render judgment on this situation. What complication? Sy'ra asked. We have received a transmission from a remote sector. A rescue vessel found an escape pod drifting in uncharted space. The occupant was severely damaged but alive. We have confirmed his identity through genetic matching. James felt something cold slide down his spine. Sy'ra had gone absolutely still, her skin flickering so fast it looked like strobe lighting. "It is Thel'kar Rhinoth, your husband. He is being transported back to Zathan as we speak. He should arrive within 48 hours. The hologram cut out. Sy'ra stood frozen in the middle of the living room, and when she finally turned to look at James, her eyes were black with shock, her skin nearly translucent. "He's alive," she whispered. 20 years, and he's alive." James wanted to say something, anything, but the words died in his throat. Because what could you say when the universe just rewrote all your certainties? When the person you thought you'd killed turned out to be alive? When the marriage you'd just entered suddenly became either salvation or catastrophe, depending on which way fate decided to spin? Sy'ra crossed the room in 3 strides and collapsed into his arms, and James held her while she shook with emotion he couldn't name, holding on like she was drowning, and he was the only solid thing in a world suddenly turned liquid and strange. Outside, the desert night pressed against the windows, and somewhere 40 light years away, a man was coming home to a wife who'd believed him dead for 20 years and had just married someone else. The story had only just begun. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and dying hope, that particular combination of industrial cleaners and desperation that James remembered from Margaret's final days. He stood in the doorway, looking at a little girl he'd never met but whose genetic code carried half of his daughter's DNA. Sy'ra was small for 8 years old, fragile as spun glass, with Emily's dark hair and eyes that held too much understanding for someone so young. Monitors beeped around her bed, tracking vitals that were slowly failing despite everything modern medicine could do. Emily sat beside the bed, holding her daughter's hand, and when she looked up and saw James, her expression went through a dozen variations of emotion before settling on exhausted desperation. Dark circles under her eyes, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked like she'd aged 5 years in the past week. "You came," she said. It wasn't quite forgiveness, but it wasn't hatred either. Progress. "Of course I came." James stepped into the room, feeling like an intruder in his own family. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The linoleum floor was polished to a shine that reflected the ceiling tiles. "Hi, Sy'ra. I'm your grandpa." The little girl studied him with solemn intensity. Her fingers were too thin, her cheekbones too prominent. "Mom says you're going to save me. With aliens." "With one alien in particular. Her name is Sy'ra. She's my wife now." Emily made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. "Married. You got married to an alien you've known for a month to save my daughter. Dad, that's either the bravest thing you've ever done or the craziest." "Probably both," James admitted. He pulled up a chair, the metal legs scraping against the floor, sat down on the other side of Sy'ra's bed. The little girl's hand was tiny in his, warm and alive and so terribly fragile. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" "Tired." Sy'ra's voice was soft, matter-of-fact. "The doctors say my brain is forgetting how to work. That sounds silly, doesn't it? Like my brain should remember what it's supposed to do." James felt his throat close. He'd faced enemy fire without flinching, had made life and death decisions at 30,000 feet, but this child's simple acceptance of her own mortality broke something in him. "Yeah, that does sound silly, but we're going to fix it. Sy'ra has technology that can help. You'll be better soon." "Will it hurt?" "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I'll be there the whole time if you want me to be." Sy'ra considered this, her young face serious in a way that reminded him achingly of Emily at that age. "Okay, then I'm not scared." The door opened. Sy'ra entered, moving with that liquid grace that still caught James off guard, her skin muted to a pale blue that suggested she was trying not to be intimidating. Behind her came Commander Chiron, and 2 other Zathan James didn't recognize, carrying equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. The smell of ozone followed them in, sharp and clean against the hospital's chemical sterility. Emily stood quickly, defensive, putting herself between the aliens and her daughter. James rose too, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. He could feel her trembling. This is Sy'ra, my wife. She's going to help Sy'ra." Sy'ra approached slowly, her amethyst eyes fixed on Emily with an expression that James was learning to read as deep empathy. "You are Emily. James has told me much about you, about his regrets, about the distance between you and his wish to bridge it." Emily's jaw tightened. "He told you he was a drunk who destroyed our family." "He told me he was a man drowning in grief who hurt the people he loved because he did not know how to live with his pain." Sy'ra's voice was gentle, non-judgmental. "He told me he carries that guilt every day, that he would give anything to undo the damage he caused." "Words are easy," Emily said, but some of the hardness had left her voice. Yes, Sy'ra moved closer to Sy'ra's bed, kneeling down so she was at eye level with the little girl. Her robes pooled around her like water. "Words are very easy. Actions are much harder. So let me take action. Let me save your daughter." She reached out slowly, giving Sy'ra time to pull away. The little girl didn't move, just watched with those 2 old eyes. Sy'ra's palm touched Sy'ra's forehead, and her skin began to glow, that bioluminescent pulse that James now recognized as Sy'ra accessing her deeper abilities. The silver traceries beneath her skin pulsed faster, brighter, creating patterns that seemed to flow like circuitry. "Her neural pathways are degrading," Sy'ra said after a moment, speaking to the other Zathan in their language before switching back to English. "But the damage is not yet irreversible. We can use cellular regeneration therapy. It will take 3 weeks. She will need to remain in our medical facility for the duration." 3 weeks. Emily's voice cracked. I have to work. I can't take that much time off." "You can stay with her," Sy'ra said. "We have accommodations for family. Both of you and James." Emily looked at James, really looked at him for the first time in 10 years. Her mother's eyes in her face. "I don't know if I can do that. Be around you that long." "You don't have to forgive me," James said quietly. "You don't even have to like me, but Sy'ra needs this. And I'd like the chance to know my granddaughter, even if you never want to know me again." Something in Emily's face cracked. She turned away, shoulders shaking, and when she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I've been so angry at you for so long. It was easier than missing you." "I know," James said. "I'm sorry for all of it." The Zathan medical facility was unlike anything James had experienced. The walls seemed to breathe, pulsing with soft bioluminescence that changed color with the time of day. The air smelled like growing things, like forests after rain, like life itself concentrated into breathable form. Sy'ra's room was more garden than hospital, with living vines climbing the walls, flowers that glowed in colors that didn't exist on Earth, and a ceiling that displayed a perfect simulation of Earth's night sky, constellations slowly wheeling overhead as the hours passed. The treatment itself was fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. The Zathan used what they called nano-regenerators, microscopic machines that entered Sy'ra's bloodstream and physically rebuilt damaged neural tissue. James watched through an observation window as his granddaughter lay in what looked like a cocoon of light, her small body surrounded by swirling patterns of blue and silver that moved like living things. The hum of the machinery was almost musical, harmonic frequencies that seemed to resonate in his bones. "She's not in pain," Sy'ra said, standing beside him. Her hand found his naturally, that electric warmth of contact flowing between them. The nano-units produce a mild sedative effect. She's essentially dreaming while they work. "What's she dreaming about?" "Whatever makes her happy. The technology reads her neural patterns and stimulates pleasure centers. It makes the healing easier. James watched the light play across Sy'ra's face. She looks peaceful. She is. Sy'ra squeezed his hand. You gave her this chance, James. You should feel proud. I feel terrified, he admitted. If this doesn't work, if something goes wrong, it's my fault. No, Sy'ra turned to face him fully. If something goes wrong, it is the universe's fault. You made the best choice you could with the information you had. That is all any of us can ever do. They stood in silence, watching Sy'ra heal, and James tried not to think about the holographic message from the Xathan Council. About Thel'nara, alive after 20 years, coming home to find his wife married to someone else. That night, in the quarters provided for family members, James and Sy'ra finally had to confront what they'd been avoiding since the council's transmission. They sat across from each other at a small table, neither quite able to meet the other's eyes. The room smelled faintly of that ozone and rain scent that clung to all Xathan spaces. Tell me about him, James said finally, about Thel'nara. Sy'ra was quiet for a long moment, her skin flickering through shades of blue like a candle in wind. He was kind. That is what I remember most. In a culture that valued strength and strategic thinking, he was gentle. He played music. He grew things. He believed the universe was fundamentally good, even when all evidence suggested otherwise. You loved him. I did for 63 years. We bonded young by Xathan standards. I was 25, he was 30. We had a son when I was 40. Ryan. She paused, pain flickering across her features like lightning. He was so much like his father, gentle, curious. He wanted to study other species, to understand how consciousness evolved differently across the galaxy. And you think he died, in the escape pod? Sy'ra nodded. The pod was built for one. Thel'nara would have given it to Ryan. Our culture, our biology, we prioritize the young. He would not have hesitated. But Thel'nara survived somehow. Apparently, her voice was hollow. I do not know how. I do not know what he experienced. I do not know if he remembers me, remembers us, remembers anything. The council said he was severely damaged. That could mean anything from physical injury to complete memory loss. James leaned forward. What do you want to do? I do not know. Sy'ra finally met his eyes, and the anguish in them was almost physical. By the law of my people, I am still married to him. Our bond was never formally dissolved. When he arrives on Xathan, when he is well enough to make decisions, he could claim me. Demand I return. And legally, morally, perhaps I should. Do you want to return to him? The question hung between them, impossible and necessary. Sy'ra stood, began to pace, her robes flowing around her like water. If you had asked me 30 days ago if I would give anything to have Thel'nara back, I would have said yes without hesitation. I have spent 20 years in mourning. 20 years believing I murdered the person I loved most in the universe. And now I am married to you. Now I have felt things I thought I would never feel again. Now I am confronted with an impossible choice between the man I loved for 60 years and the man I am learning to love now. Learning to love, James repeated. Not love, learning. Sy'ra stopped pacing, turned to face him. Do not ask me to define what this is between us. It is too new, too fragile, too complicated by circumstances. But I will tell you this. When I touch you, when I sense your emotions, I feel something I have not felt since I was young. I feel alive. I feel possible. I feel like perhaps I deserve a future after all. That's not an answer to my question. No, Sy'ra crossed to him, knelt down so they were eye level. It is not, because I do not have an answer yet, because I need time to think, to feel, to understand what duty requires and what my heart wants. Can you give me that time? James thought about Margaret, about permission, about the fact that he'd known this woman for 29 days, and married her for reasons that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with saving a dying child. He thought about how unfair it was to ask her to choose between two impossible loyalties. He thought about being 67 years old and finally feeling alive again, and how terrifying it was to imagine going back to the hollow existence he'd known before. "Yeah," he said finally, "I can give you time. But Sy'ra, I need you to know something. I didn't marry you to trap you. I married you to save Sy'ra. If going back to Thel'kar is what you need to do, if that's what's right, then I'll let you go. It'll kill me, but I'll do it." "You would do that?" "I love you," James said, and the words felt like stepping off a cliff. "I don't know how it happened so fast. I don't know if it's real or if it's just two broken people finding each other in the dark. But I love you. And love means wanting the other person to be happy, even if it's not with you." Sy'ra's skin flared bright with emotion, that luminescence so intense James had to squint. She reached out, cupped his face in her hands, and the sensation of contact was overwhelming. Every emotion, every fear, every desperate hope flowing between them like current through wire. "I cannot promise you anything," she whispered. "I cannot tell you I will choose you over him. I cannot even tell you what I will choose. But I can tell you this. You have given me something precious. You have reminded me what it feels like to want tomorrow. Thank you for that gift." She kissed him then, not the Xathan way with touching foreheads, but the human way, lips to lips, and her mouth was warm and tasted like ozone and rain and growing things. When they pulled apart, they were both shaking. The next 2 weeks developed a rhythm. Days, James spent time with Sy'ra while she healed, reading to her, telling her stories about Margaret, about flying fighter jets, about the desert and mountains and all the beautiful things the world contained. Emily gradually thawed, joining their conversations, even laughing once or twice at James's deliberately terrible jokes. He learned that Sy'ra loved astronomy, that she wanted to be an astronaut when she grew up, that she'd already memorized the names of all the moons of Jupiter. Evenings, he and Sy'ra walked through the Xathan compound, talking about everything and nothing. She taught him words in her language, liquid sounds that felt strange in his mouth. Thelris meant starlight. Vinkara meant the space between breaths. Sinara meant the moment when grief transforms into memory. He taught her about baseball statistics, a concept so absurd she accused him of making it up. They didn't talk about Thel'kar. They didn't talk about the future. They existed in a bubble of present tense, knowing it couldn't last, but pretending anyway. On the 15th day, Chiron found them in the garden. His expression was grim, his silver eyes holding something that might have been sympathy. "Ambassador, a transmission from Xathan. Thel'kar has recovered enough to communicate. He has been informed of the situation. He wishes to speak with you." Sy'ra went very still, her skin paling to almost white. The council arranged this. "No," he requested it directly. "He has that right as your bonded partner." James felt something cold settle in his stomach. "I should go. Give you privacy." "No," Sy'ra's hand shot out, gripped his with surprising strength. "Stay, please, I need you here." The holographic projection appeared in the center of the garden, life-sized, startlingly real. The image quality was perfect, every detail rendered with crystalline clarity. Thel'kar Rhinoth looked older than James had expected, his blue skin darker, almost navy, marked with scars that suggested terrible trauma. Burns across his left shoulder, a jagged line down his right arm. His eyes were the same silver as Chiron's, but clouded with something that might have been pain or confusion or both. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse, damaged, like someone who'd screamed until their vocal cords tore. "Sy'ra, they tell me you are my wife. They tell me we were bonded for 63 years. They tell me we had a son who died. I do not remember any of this." Sy'ra's skin had gone nearly translucent, the silver traceries pulsing erratically. "You do not remember." "I remember waking in darkness. I remember pain. I remember cold so absolute I thought I had died and this was the afterlife. I remember being found by strangers who did not speak my language. I remember 20 years of fragments, pieces, nothing coherent. His gaze shifted, found James. And they tell me you have married again. A human. She married me to save my granddaughter's life, James said, stepping forward. It was a legal maneuver, not a betrayal. Thel'nara's expression didn't change. Was it only legal, or is there more? Silence. Sy'ra and James exchanged glances. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady despite the chaos James could feel through their contact. There is more. I will not lie to you, even if you do not remember me. James and I have developed feelings for each other. I do not know what to call them yet, but they exist. I see. Thel'nara looked between them, his scarred face unreadable. Then I will make this simple for you. I do not remember you, Sy'ra. I do not know what we were to each other. But I am told we bonded, we loved, we built a life. I am told you believed yourself responsible for my death, that you have carried that guilt for 20 years. Yes, Sy'ra whispered. Then let me give you something. Thel'nara's voice softened, that damaged rasp becoming almost gentle. Release, forgiveness, whatever you need to call it. I do not remember loving you, but I believe I must have because everyone who knew us says we were devoted to each other. So I will honor that love I cannot recall by telling you this. You are not responsible for my survival or my suffering. You made a choice in war. I made a choice to save our son. We both did what we thought was right. Our son, Sy'ra said, her voice breaking. Ryan, is there any chance he also survived? No, Thel'nara's voice broke too, and for the first time James saw real emotion cross that scarred face. I remember that much. I remember his face. I remember sealing him into the pod. I remember the oxygen running out. I remember him stopping breathing, and I remember not being able to do anything except hold him. That memory I have. I wish I did not, but I have it. The garden was absolutely silent except for the sound of Sy'ra weeping, that soft, keening noise that James now recognized as Xathan grief, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than lungs or throat. He wanted to go to her, hold her, but this felt like a moment she needed to experience alone, a final goodbye to the son she'd mourned for 20 years. They tell me you have 1 year to live, Sy'ra said eventually, pulling herself together with visible effort. That the damage is too extensive for full recovery. That is what the doctors say, yes. Thel'nara nodded, that scarred face accepting. Perhaps less. My body is failing slowly but inevitably. I am making peace with this. Then I will come home, Sy'ra said, and James felt the words like a knife between his ribs. I will come to Xathan. I will care for you in your final days. It is the least I can do. No, Thel'nara's voice was firm despite his weakness. You will not. But you are my husband. By law, by custom, by duty. I am a stranger who shares genetic material with a man you once loved. Thel'nara leaned forward in his hologram, his scarred face intense. Sy'ra, I have spent 20 years in darkness and pain and isolation. I have lost everything, my memory, my health, my future. The one thing I will not take from you is your chance at happiness. You have found someone who makes you want to live again. That is precious. Do not throw it away for the sake of a bond I cannot even remember. I cannot just abandon you, Sy'ra said. You are not abandoning me. I have my mother. I have friends, I am told, though I do not recall them. I have medical care. What I do not have and cannot provide is love. If you come back to Xathan out of duty, you will watch me die while wishing you were somewhere else. That is a cruelty to both of us. James found his voice. If she wants to come, she should come. Don't make this decision for her. Thel'nara's silver eyes fixed on him, and James saw intelligence there, a mind still sharp despite the damaged body. You love her. Yes. And you would let her go if she chose to. I already told her that. Good, Thel'nara smiled, faint and sad. Then you are better for her than I could be right now. I am a ghost human, a remnant. She needs someone alive, someone whole, someone who can give her a future. Be that person for her. The transmission ended. Sy'ra stood in the center of the garden, shaking with emotion, her skin cycling through colors so fast it was almost seizure-inducing. James went to her, pulled her into his arms, and held her while she wept. "He gave me permission," she said against his chest, "just as your Margaret gave you permission. Why does it feel worse instead of better?" "Because now you have to actually make a choice," James said quietly. "Before, you could hide behind duty, behind what you thought you owed him. Now you have to decide what you actually want." "I do not know what I want." Her hands clutched at his shirt. "I am 105 years old. I have seen empires rise and fall. I have commanded fleets, negotiated treaties, witnessed the birth of new stars. And right now I feel like a child who has lost her way in a forest." "Then we'll find the way together," James said. "No more hiding. No more pretending the future isn't coming. We figure this out right now, honestly." They sat in the garden as the artificial sky cycled through its programmed sunset, and they talked. Really talked, with the kind of brutal honesty that only comes when there's no time left for lies. Sy'ra told him about her fears, that she was too old, too damaged, too alien for this to ever work, that her lifespan meant she would outlive him by decades, would have to watch him age and die while she was still middle-aged by Xathan standards, that the cultural differences between their species were vast enough to swallow any relationship. James told her his fears, that he was too broken, too haunted, too human for this to ever work, that he would fail her the way he'd failed Margaret, failed Emily, failed the 4 people who died under his command. That loving her was selfish, was him trying to fill a void that could never be filled. And then they told each other the truth underneath the fears. "I want to wake up next to you," Sy'ra said. "I want to learn all your strange human customs. I want to argue about meaningless things like whether this beverage you insist on drinking is acceptable or an abomination. I want to meet your daughter and know your granddaughter. I want to build something new that honors what we both lost without being trapped by it." "I want that too," James said. "All of it. Even knowing it's complicated and probably impossible and definitely going to piss off a lot of people on both our worlds. I want it anyway." "Then we choose it." Sy'ra took his hands in hers, that electric contact singing between them. "We choose each other. We choose to try. And if it fails, if the universe conspires against us, at least we will have tried." They sealed it with a kiss, human style, in a garden that smelled like growing things under an artificial sky. And somewhere 40 light years away, a dying man smiled and hoped he'd done the right thing. The next week, Sy'ra completed her treatment. The transformation was miraculous. Color returned to her face, no longer that waxy pallor of illness. Strength returned to her limbs, muscles rebuilding under the nano-regenerator's work. The neural scans showed complete regeneration of damaged tissue, pathways lighting up like a city at night. She was, by every medical measure, cured. Emily wept when the doctors gave her the news. She turned to James, and for the first time in a decade, she hugged him. Really hugged him, hard enough that his ribs ached, her tears soaking into his shirt. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how to forgive you for the past, but thank you for giving my daughter a future." "You don't have to forgive me," James said, even though the words hurt. "Just let me be part of her life. Let me try to be the grandfather I should have been from the start." "Okay," Emily pulled back, wiped her eyes. "Okay, we can try that." That night, there was a small celebration in the Xathan compound. Sy'ra, full of energy for the first time in years, ran around the garden while Emily watched with tears of joy streaming down her face. Dr. Webb had come, bringing whiskey and his dry British wit. Even Chiron seemed to soften slightly, his silver eyes less hostile when he looked at James. though he still watched with the wariness of a soldier who'd seen too many battles go wrong. Sy'ra stood beside James, her hand in his, skin glowing with contentment. "This is what peace looks like," she said quietly. "This moment right here. This is what we fought for, what we sacrificed for, what we spent 20 years believing we did not deserve." "And now?" James asked. "Now we accept it. We take the gift and honor it by living fully." The celebration was interrupted by an urgent transmission. The Xathan Council, all 5 members appearing as holograms in the garden, their expressions grave. The festive atmosphere died like someone had thrown a switch. James felt his stomach drop. Ambassador Thel'nara, Council Leader Thalris began, her ancient face carved from stone. "We have completed our investigation into your marriage to Colonel James Hawthorne and the subsequent medical intervention for his granddaughter." Sy'ra stepped forward, her spine straight, ready to accept whatever judgment came. Her skin had gone pale but steady. "I understand. What is the Council's decision?" "Before we render judgment, there is something you should know." Thalris looked uncomfortable, which James wouldn't have thought possible for a being who'd lived for 300 years. "We have received a formal petition from someone whose voice carries considerable weight in these matters." The hologram shifted. A new figure appeared, an elderly Xathan female with skin so dark it was nearly purple, eyes that held centuries of wisdom and sorrow. Deep lines marked her face like rivers carved into ancient stone. James recognized her from his research. Sy'ra Thel'nara, Sy'ra's mother-in-law, Thel'kar's mother. Sy'ra went absolutely rigid, her skin flashing through emotions too fast to read. "Elder Liara, I did not expect to see you here." "Nor I you, child." Liara's voice was tired but firm, carrying the weight of centuries. "But circumstances require my presence. I have something to tell you, something I should have told you 20 years ago." "What is it?" Sy'ra asked, her voice barely audible. "The mission that took Thel'kar and Ryan. The intelligence that led you to order the strike on what you believed was a weapons facility. It was not faulty intelligence. It was deliberate." Silence fell across the garden like snow. Even Sy'ra stopped running, sensing the adult's sudden tension. "What are you saying?" Sy'ra whispered. "I am saying that I was Supreme Commander at that time. I was the one who sent our forces into that sector. I knew there was a possibility of ambush. I knew Thel'kar's rescue team was in the area, and I sent the false intelligence to you anyway." "Why?" The word came out like a scream, Sy'ra's control finally breaking. "Why would you do that?" "Because 50,000 civilians would have died otherwise." Liara's composure cracked, tears beginning to flow, silver against her dark skin. "The Korvax had hostages. They had weapons capabilities that would have devastated 3 of our colony worlds. I had to make a choice. Sacrifice 47 soldiers, including my own son and grandson, or sacrifice 50,000 innocents. I chose the soldiers. I chose my own family. And I let you believe it was your fault for 20 years, because I was too much of a coward to admit what I had done." Sy'ra staggered. James caught her, held her up as her legs gave out. "You let me think I killed them, for 20 years. "Yes," Liara's eyes were wet, decades of held-back tears finally flowing free. "I told myself it was kinder, that you were young, that you could recover, that the burden should fall on someone old enough to bear it. But the truth is I was afraid. Afraid my people would turn against me if they knew I had sacrificed my own blood. Afraid you would hate me, afraid of my own weakness." The council members were silent, watching this confession with expressions that suggested this was news to them as well. Thalris looked like she'd been struck. "I come before this council now," Liara continued, "to confess my crime, to demand punishment for my deception, and to petition that Sy'ra Thel'nara be absolved of any wrongdoing in the matter of her marriage to the human. She has carried my guilt long enough. She deserves to be free. Thalris looked between Liara and Sy'ra, clearly struggling with what to say. Elder Liara, your confession creates significant complications for our judgment. I understand that, but I will not let an innocent woman be punished for my choices any longer. She saved a child's life using the means available to her. She found love again after 20 years of mourning. These are not crimes. These are examples of what we should aspire to be. The council conferred in their own language, rapid-fire exchanges that James couldn't follow but whose intensity was clear in the harsh consonants and rising tones. Sy'ra stood silent in his arms, shaking with emotion he couldn't begin to process. Finally, Thalris spoke. The council has reached a decision. Regarding Ambassador Sy'ra Thel'nara's marriage to Colonel James Hawthorne and the medical intervention for Sy'ra Hawthorne, we find no violation of Xathan law. The humanitarian exception clause, which Elder Liara helped write 30 years ago, clearly allows for medical intervention when a child's life is at stake. Furthermore, the marriage, while unusual, was entered into willingly by both parties and serves a legitimate purpose under our kinship laws. Sy'ra looked up sharply, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. You are saying I am not being punished. We are saying you are being removed from your position as ambassador, not as punishment, but because you have chosen to make Earth your primary residence. You will retain your Xathan citizenship and all associated rights. However, you will no longer serve in an official diplomatic capacity. And the marriage, James asked, is it legally recognized? By Xathan law, yes. The marriage stands. All kinship bonds created by it, including Colonel Hawthorne's relationship to Sy'ra, are legally valid. What about Liara? Sy'ra asked. What happens to her? That, Thalris said grimly, is a matter for a different proceeding. Elder Liara has confessed to dereliction of duty and conspiracy to mislead a superior officer. She will face a tribunal. Given her age and service record, punishment will likely be administrative rather than criminal, but there will be consequences. I accept them, Liara said calmly. Whatever they are, I accept them. Sy'ra, child, I know I have no right to ask your forgiveness, but I hope you will understand why I did what I did, even if you cannot forgive how I did it. Sy'ra was quiet for a long moment, James feeling the emotions roiling through her via their contact. Then, you gave me 20 years of guilt I did not earn. You let me believe I was a murderer when I was only a soldier following orders. I do not know if I can forgive that. I understand. But you also just freed me from that guilt. You told the truth when it cost you everything. That takes courage I am not sure I possess. So while I cannot forgive you yet, I can acknowledge your bravery. Perhaps that is a start. Liara nodded, tears still flowing. Perhaps it is. Be well, Sy'ra, be happy. You have earned it. The transmission ended. The garden was silent except for Sy'ra's small voice asking Emily what just happened. James held Sy'ra while she processed 20 years of guilt being lifted away, replaced by a different kind of weight. The weight of freedom. The weight of choice. The weight of a future suddenly, impossibly open. It is over, she said finally. The lie is over. I did not kill them. I was a weapon someone else fired. That does not erase the pain, but it changes its shape. Does it help? James asked, knowing. I do not know yet. She looked up at him, eyes bright with tears and something else. Something that might have been hope. Ask me again in a year. The celebration continued, subdued but genuine. Emily approached Sy'ra hesitantly, Sy'ra by her side, her medical training warring with her maternal protectiveness. I don't really understand everything that just happened, Emily said, but I know you saved my daughter's life. I know you married my father to make it possible, so thank you for all of it. Sy'ra knelt down to Sy'ra's level, her robes pooling around her. How are you feeling, little one? Really good. Sy'ra bounced on her toes, full of that manic energy only children possess. The doctors say I'm all better, and Mom says I can go back to school and play soccer and everything. Everything, Sy'ra agreed. You have your whole life ahead of you. Use it well. I will. Sy'ra threw her arms around Sy'ra's neck, and the alien woman went very still for a moment before carefully hugging her back. When are you and Grandpa gonna have a real wedding? With a cake and everything. Sy'ra looked at James over Sy'ra's head, a question in her eyes. He smiled, shrugged. Why not? We've done everything else backward. Might as well have a wedding after we're already married. That night, lying in bed in the quarters they now shared officially, James traced the luminescent patterns on Sy'ra's skin and tried to process everything that had happened. A month ago, he'd been a man waiting to die. Now he was married to an alien, reconciling with his daughter, building a relationship with his granddaughter, and somehow, against all probability, happy. Are you afraid? Sy'ra asked quietly. Terrified, he admitted. This is all happening so fast. I keep waiting for it to fall apart. It might. Nothing is guaranteed. But is that a reason not to try? No, James pulled her closer, breathing in that ozone and rain scent. No, it's not. They lay in silence, skin to skin, sharing warmth and electric contact, and something deeper than words. Outside, the desert night pressed against the windows, and somewhere in the compound, Sy'ra laughed at something Emily said, the sound carrying through the walls like birdsong. Tell me about Margaret, Sy'ra said suddenly. I want to know her. I want to understand the woman who gave you permission to love again. So James told her. About meeting Margaret in college, about their disastrous first date where he'd spilled an entire pot of coffee, and she'd laughed instead of getting angry. About their wedding in a small church in Montana with 50 people and wildflowers she'd picked herself. About the way she hummed when she cooked, and how she could never remember where she put her car keys, and how she'd wanted 3 kids, but they'd only managed to have 1, and she'd loved Emily with a fierceness that sometimes scared him. He told her about the cancer, about watching someone you love disappear piece by piece while medicine fought and failed, about holding her hand while she slept, memorizing every detail because he knew he wouldn't have forever. About the last conversation, about permission, about how for 5 years he'd thought she was crazy for thinking he could ever love anyone else. She was wise, Sy'ra said when he finished. Wiser than I was. When Thel'nara died, or when I thought he died, I decided love was over for me, that I would spend the rest of my life alone as penance. Your Margaret understood something I did not. That love is not diminished by being shared. That the heart has room for more than one story. I wish you could have met her, James said. I think you two would have liked each other. I think so too. Sy'ra kissed him softly. She would approve of this, I think, of us trying. Yeah, James smiled against her lips. Yeah, she would. The next morning brought news from Xathen. Thel'nara had requested to speak with them again. This time, when the hologram appeared, he looked stronger, more present, though still clearly ill. The scars on his face seemed less pronounced, or maybe James was just getting used to them. I wanted to update you, he said without preamble. The doctors have revised their timeline. I have perhaps 6 months, not a year. My body is failing faster than they anticipated. I am sorry, Sy'ra said, and James could hear the genuine sorrow in her voice. Do not be. Thel'nara smiled, and James saw something in that expression that reminded him of what Sy'ra must have loved. Gentleness. Peace. 6 months of consciousness is better than 20 years of darkness. And I wanted to tell you, both of you, that I have been remembering things. Small things. The way Ryan laughed. The sound of rain on Xathen. A song you used to sing, Sy'ra, when you thought no one could hear. I sang. Sy'ra sounded startled. Terribly. Thel'nara's smile widened. You have many gifts, but music is not among them. Ryan and I used to tease you about it." "That sounds like something we would do," Sy'ra said softly. "I also wanted to tell you that my mother came to see me. We talked about what she did, about the choice she made. And I told her the same thing I am going to tell you now. She made the best decision she could with the information she had. 47 lives for 50,000. That is not murder. That is mathematics. Terrible mathematics, but mathematics nonetheless." "You are more forgiving than I could be," Sy'ra said. "No, I am simply too tired to carry anger. It is a young person's luxury, rage. I no longer have the energy for it." James spoke up. "Is there anything we can do for you? Anything you need?" "Just one thing." Thel'nara's silver eyes were serious. "Make her happy. Make each other happy. Do not waste time on guilt or doubt or fear. I have wasted 20 years in darkness. Do not waste the light you have found together." "We won't," James promised. "Good," Thel'nara nodded once. "Then I have one request. When I die, I would like you both to be there. Not in person, the distance makes that impossible, but connected via hologram. I do not want to die alone." "Of course," Sy'ra said, tears in her voice. "Of course we will be there." "Thank you, and Sy'ra, one more thing. When I am gone, when you are free in every sense of the word, marry him again. Not for law or convenience, but for love. Do it properly. With flowers and witnesses and all the silly human traditions. Live fully. That is all any of us can do." The transmission ended. Sy'ra turned to James, luminescent tears tracking down her face, and he held her while she grieved for a man she'd loved and lost and lost again in the span of a month. "We have 6 months," she said against his chest. 6 months before I am truly free." "We have 6 months to prepare," James corrected. "To build something strong enough to last beyond duty. To make sure we're choosing each other for the right reasons." "And what are the right reasons?" "Love, joy. The stubborn refusal to let the universe's cruelty define us." He tilted her face up, looked into those amethyst depths. "We've both been dead long enough, Sy'ra. Let's try being alive together." "Yes," she said. "Yes, let us try that." And so they did. The 6 months passed like water through fingers, too fast and too slow at the same time. James learned what it meant to build a life with someone while knowing death was counting down the days in the background. He learned the rhythms of Sy'ra's moods, the way her skin darkened to indigo when she was deeply sad, brightened to almost white when she laughed. He learned that she hated mornings but loved sunsets, that she could read 3 books simultaneously without mixing up the plots, that she had a voice that could shatter glass but hummed constantly when she thought no one was listening. He learned what it meant to be a grandfather. Sy'ra came to visit every weekend, full of questions about everything. Why was the sky blue? Where did stars come from? Did Grandpa really fly planes that went faster than sound? How come humans could eat chocolate but it was poisonous to dogs? Sy'ra would sit with them in the garden, adding her own perspective, explaining how the sky looked different on Zathon with 3 suns, how stars were born in clouds of gas and dust, how Zathon's spacecraft could cross light years in weeks using technology humans were still decades from understanding. Emily came too, hesitant at first, then gradually more comfortable. She and Sy'ra developed an unlikely friendship, bonding over their shared experience of watching someone they loved waste away. Emily told stories about Margaret, about the mother Sy'ra would never meet, the way she could make anyone laugh even when they were crying, how she'd sung lullabies in a voice as bad as Sy'ra's own. And in return, Sy'ra told Emily about Thel'nara before the war, before the loss, when he was just a musician who grew exotic plants and believed the universe was fundamentally kind. One afternoon in late March, Emily found James alone in the kitchen, trying and failing to make Sy'ra's favorite earth food, which turned out to be plain rice. Just rice. Nothing else. She found the simplicity beautiful, the way each grain was perfect and complete. "You're happy," Emily said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," James admitted, measuring out water with the precision he'd once used for flight calculations. "I am. Is that wrong, given everything?" Emily sat down at the table, traced patterns in the wood grain. Her fingers were still stained with the purple of Sy'ra's finger paints from earlier. "I spent 10 years hating you. 10 years telling myself you were a monster, that you destroyed our family, that Mom died because you broke her heart with your drinking and your absence." "I did do those things," James said quietly, setting down the measuring cup. "I know, but I'm starting to understand that people are more complicated than the worst things they've done." She looked up at him, eyes wet. "You were drowning, Dad. You made terrible choices while you were drowning. That doesn't erase the harm, but it means I can maybe start to forgive." James set down the measuring cup, went to his daughter, and for the second time in 6 months she let him hold her while she cried. "I'm sorry," he said into her hair, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. "For all of it. For not being strong enough to stay afloat. For pulling you down with me." "I'm sorry too," Emily whispered. "For cutting you off completely. For not giving you a chance to get better. For letting Sy'ra grow up without knowing you." "We're here now," James said. "That's what matters." When Sy'ra came home that evening, she found them cooking together, father and daughter moving around each other in the kitchen with the ease of people learning to be family again. She stood in the doorway, skin glowing soft blue, and James saw tears on her face, silver against the luminescence. "What's wrong?" he asked, alarmed. "Nothing is wrong." Sy'ra's voice was thick with emotion. "This is what I have been waiting 20 years to feel again. The sense that a house is a home, that family is more than blood, that it is possible to build something beautiful from broken pieces." The holographic calls with Thel'nara became a weekly ritual. Every Sunday evening, they would connect across 40 light years, and the three of them would talk. Thel'nara was deteriorating visibly, his dark blue skin going gray, his movements slowing, but his mind remained sharp. He remembered more now, fragments returning like pieces of a shattered mirror being glued back together. He told them about the escape pod, about the 20 years drifting in the cold and dark, how he'd put himself in emergency stasis to conserve oxygen, waking periodically to check systems, always hoping for rescue. How he'd held Ryan's body until the cold forced him into stasis one final time. How when the pod's power finally failed, he'd accepted death, made peace with it, and then the salvage ship had found him purely by accident. "I should have died 100 times," he said one evening, his voice stronger than usual. "The odds against survival were astronomical. But here I am, and I have come to believe there was a reason for it." "What reason?" Sy'ra asked. "To give you permission." Thel'nara's silver eyes were clear, focused. "If I had simply died 20 years ago, you would have mourned and eventually moved on. But because you believed you killed me, you trapped yourself in guilt. The universe kept me alive just long enough to tell you the truth, that you are not a murderer, that you deserve happiness, that I want you to have it." "That is a very human way of thinking," Sy'ra said softly, "looking for meaning in randomness." "Perhaps I am becoming more human." Thel'nara smiled. "James, you are teaching my wife your species' stubborn optimism. I approve." The conversations weren't always heavy. Thel'nara had a dry sense of humor that reminded James of Dr. Webb. He made jokes about Zathan bureaucracy, about the nurses who treated him like he was made of glass, about the food in the medical facility that somehow managed to be both bland and offensive. He asked James about baseball and claimed to understand the rules, which was obviously a lie because nobody understood baseball rules. Not really. In late April, Thel'nara's mother Liara joined one of the calls. She had been stripped of her rank and position, placed under house arrest pending a full tribunal. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, but her eyes were clear. The dark purple of her skin had faded slightly, James noticed, as though grief was bleaching the color out of her. "Sy'ra," she said, "I wanted to apologize again, properly. Not as a commander making excuses, but as a mother who failed the daughter of her heart." "You did not fail me," Sy'ra said carefully. "You made an impossible choice in wartime. 47 for 50,000. The mathematics are clear." "The mathematics are irrelevant." Liara's voice was fierce despite her diminished state. "I should have told you the truth immediately. I should have taken responsibility. Instead, I was a coward, and you paid the price." "I have paid many prices in my life," Sy'ra said. "This was one of the smaller ones in the end, because it led me here, to James, to this strange second chance at happiness. So perhaps I should thank you." Liara began to cry, those silver Zathan tears that caught the light like mercury. "You are far kinder than I deserve." "Perhaps," Sy'ra's skin flickered through shades of blue, "or perhaps I am simply tired of carrying anger. It is heavy, and I am ready to put it down." After that call, James held Sy'ra while she shook with the enormity of forgiveness. "It's done," she whispered. 20 years of rage and guilt and shame, and it is finally done. I do not know who I am without it." "You're who you were always meant to be," James said. "Someone who loves fiercely and forgives harder. Someone who chooses joy even when the universe offers nothing but pain." The wedding planning started in May. Sy'ra insisted on being the flower girl, even though technically Sy'ra and James were already married. Emily helped choose the venue, a botanical garden in Tucson that reminded Sy'ra of home with its exotic plants and careful cultivation. Dr. Webb agreed to officiate, having got himself ordained online specifically for the occasion, muttering about the absurdity of technology the entire time. "You're sure about this?" Webb asked James one afternoon while they were reviewing the ceremony script. His British accent made everything sound more serious. "Marrying an alien in front of God and everybody. No going back after this. It'll be on every news feed from here to Alpha Centauri." "I've never been more sure of anything," James said. Webb studied him for a long moment, then shook his head with something that might have been wonder. "You look different. Younger, somehow. Like someone turned the lights back on inside you." "That's exactly what happened." James smiled. "I was dead for 5 years, Marcus. Walking around, breathing but dead inside. Sy'ra brought me back to life." "Then God help anyone who tries to take that away from you." Webb paused, then added quietly, "You know, after Janet died, I thought that was it for me. Figured I'd just teach until they put me in the ground. Watching you two, though, makes me wonder if maybe there's still time for an old bastard like me." "There's always time," James said, "until there isn't." The news media had gotten wind of the story, of course. The first human to marry a Zathan. The interspecies love affair that had saved a dying child and sparked a diplomatic incident. James gave exactly one interview to a sympathetic reporter from NPR and said only this: "Love doesn't care about species or planets or the distance between stars. It just cares about two people choosing each other every day for as long as they have." The quote went viral. People debated it on social media, wrote think pieces about it, used it in arguments about immigration and integration, and what it meant to be human in an age when humanity was no longer alone in the universe. James ignored all of it. He had more important things to focus on. Like the fact that Thel'kar was dying. The call came on a Tuesday in early June, hot wind blowing across the desert, carrying the smell of creosote and approaching monsoons. James was in the garden, planting tomatoes that Sy'ra had declared fascinating for their complete uselessness as a staple crop. His phone buzzed, dirt still under his fingernails. Chiron's voice, tight with urgency. "Colonel Hawthorne, you need to come to the compound immediately. Thel'kar's condition has deteriorated. The doctors estimate he has hours, perhaps a day at most. He is asking for both of you." James found Sy'ra in the study, already standing, her skin gone nearly white with shock. She'd received the same call. They looked at each other, and no words were necessary. They went. The holographic connection was already established when they arrived. Thel'kar lay in a medical bed, surrounded by equipment that beeped and hummed and measured the slow shutdown of his body. His skin had gone completely gray, his breathing labored, each breath sounding like it took all his strength. But his eyes were clear when he saw them. "Sy'ra," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "James, you came." "Of course we came," Sy'ra said, and James could hear her fighting to keep her voice steady. "You asked us to." "I am sorry." Thel'kar tried to smile. "I had hoped to last until your wedding. I wanted to see you happy, properly happy, not just through a hologram." "We can move the wedding," James said. "Do it now here over the connection." "No," Thel'kar's voice was firm despite his weakness. "This moment is not about celebration. It is about completion, about closing circles, about me telling you both something important before I go." He paused, gathering strength, his chest rising and falling with visible effort. "Sy'ra, I remember now. I remember everything. Our bonding ceremony under the 3 suns. The birth of Ryan, how you held him and cried with joy. The way you would stay up all night studying star charts for your missions. The way you hummed off-key when you cooked, a sound that should have been annoying but was somehow the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. The way you loved me with such fierce devotion. I sometimes forgot to be afraid of anything because I knew you would fight the universe itself to keep me safe." Sy'ra was weeping openly now, luminescent tears streaming down her face, her whole body glowing with emotion. "I remember the war," Thel'kar continued, his voice getting weaker. "I remember the mission. I remember putting Ryan in the escape pod and knowing I was condemning myself to death. And I remember thinking in that last moment before the pod launched that I hoped you would find someone else. Someone who could love you the way you deserved. Someone who would make you happy. You wanted that, even then. Even then, because love, real love, does not demand eternal loneliness. It demands eternal joy. And if I could not provide that joy, then I wanted someone else to." James stepped closer to the hologram, as close as he could get without his hand passing through the illusion of Thel'kar's body. "I'll take care of her. I promise you, for as long as I live." "I know you will." Thel'kar's eyes shifted to James. "You are a good man, Colonel Hawthorne. You have known loss as I have known it. You understand that love is not about possession but about witness. About standing beside someone and saying, 'I see you. I understand you. I choose you.' That is what Sy'ra needs. That is what you give her." He coughed, a wet sound that made the medical equipment spike in alarm. Nurses moved in the background, checking readouts, administering something through an IV, but James could see it was too late. When Thel'kar spoke again, his voice was fainter. "Sy'ra, I need you to do something for me. Something difficult." "Anything," she said. "Let me go, not just physically, though that will happen soon enough, but emotionally. Release whatever guilt or obligation you still feel toward me. I am giving you my blessing, my permission, my joy at your future. Do you understand?" "I understand." Sy'ra's voice broke, "but I do not know if I can." "You can, you already have, in every way that matters. This is just making it official." He paused, breathing hard, each breath more labored than the last. "One more thing. Name your first child after Ryan. If you have children, keep that part of me alive in the world." James and Sy'ra looked at each other. They hadn't talked about children. The age difference, the biology, the sheer improbability of it all. But in that moment, James saw something in Sy'ra's eyes. Hope, possibility. "We will," Sy'ra promised. "If the universe allows it, we will." "Good." Thel'kar's eyes were closing. That is good. I can rest now, knowing you will be happy, knowing some part of what we built together will continue, knowing I did not survive 20 years in darkness for nothing." "You didn't," James said. "You survived to set her free. That's everything." Thel'kar smiled, faint as starlight. "Sy'ra, one last thing. The song. The one I used to play for you on the Velthar. Do you remember it?" Sy'ra nodded, unable to speak. "Sing it for me, please. I do not care that you cannot carry a tune. I want to hear it one last time." And so she sang. In Xathan, in that liquid language that sounded like water over stones, a melody that was clearly being murdered but was beautiful anyway because of the love in it. James didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. "Farewell. Thank you. I release you. Go and be happy." Thelkar's breathing slowed, steadied, then simply stopped. The medical equipment screamed alarms. Nurses rushed in. But James could see on Thelkar's face that he had already gone, peacefully, listening to his wife's terrible singing one last time. Sy'ra stood frozen, her song trailing off into silence. James went to her, wrapped his arms around her from behind, and held her while she grieved. Not for the husband she'd known 60 years ago, but for the stranger who had given her the gift of freedom. For the ghost who had loved her enough to let her go. The funeral was held on Xathan 3 days later. James and Sy'ra attended via hologram, standing in James's living room while 40 light-years away. Thelkar's body was returned to the earth in a garden ceremony that Xathan tradition demanded. Liara was there, freed from house arrest to attend her son's burial. She spoke about sacrifice, about the cost of command, about how Thelkar had understood duty in a way few others could. When it was Sy'ra's turn to speak, she kept it brief. "Thelkar Rhinoth was the kindest person I ever knew. He taught me that strength and gentleness are not opposites. He gave me a son I will love forever. And even in death, even after 20 years of suffering, he gave me permission to live again. I will honor that gift by living as fully as I can." After the ceremony, after the hologram disconnected and they were alone again, Sy'ra turned to James and said something he'd never expected. "I want to go to Xathan, not to stay, just to visit, to see my home one more time, to say goodbye to the person I was there. Will you come with me?" James thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. "Of course. When?" "After the wedding. We will marry here on Earth, in the place that gave us each other. And then we will go to Xathan together, and you will meet my people, and I will show you the world that made me. And then we will come home." "Home," James repeated. "You mean Earth?" "I mean wherever you are." Sy'ra took his hands, that electric contact singing between them. "You are my home now, James Hawthorne. The planet is just details." The wedding took place on the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, when the desert sun blazed overhead and the shadows were short and sharp. The botanical garden was transformed into something between Earth and Xathan, with native cacti and succulents interspersed with bioluminescent plants Sy'ra had imported from home. They glowed faintly even in daylight, pulses of blue and silver that made the whole space feel otherworldly. 200 people attended. Emily and Sy'ra, of course. Sy'ra's flower girl dress a shade of blue that matched Sy'ra's skin. Dr. Webb in his capacity as efficient, looking uncomfortable in a suit. James's old Air Force buddies, some of whom had flown in from across the country, gray-haired and weathered but still carrying themselves with military bearing. University colleagues, neighbors, strangers who'd followed the story and asked permission to witness history. And 40 Xathan, members of the delegation who'd come to see their former ambassador married to a human. Chiron stood as Sy'ra's honor guard, his expression still suspicious, but softened by something that might have been respect. Before the ceremony, he'd pulled James aside, those silver eyes boring into him. "I misjudged you, Colonel," he'd said in his deep voice. "I thought you were using her, taking advantage of her grief. But I see now that you love her as fiercely as she loves you. That is rare. Guard that love well." "I intend to," James had replied. "If you ever hurt her," Chiron had continued, his voice dropping even lower, "there are creative uses for Xathan biotechnology that humans have not dreamed of yet." James had believed him. The ceremony was a hybrid of human and Xathan traditions. Webb spoke about love as a force that transcended boundaries. His British accent lending gravity to words James had helped him write. Then he stepped aside for a Xathan elder to perform the ritual of soul binding, a ceremony that involved Sy'ra and James pressing their foreheads together, while the elder chanted in a language that predated human civilization, words that vibrated in frequencies James could feel in his chest. When it was time for vows, they'd written their own. James went first, his voice carrying across the garden. "Sy'ra Thel'nara. 6 months ago, I was a dead man walking. I had given up on everything except guilt and whiskey and waiting for my body to catch up with my spirit. Then you walked onto that stage and told your story, and I recognized myself in you. I saw what it looked like when someone else carried the same weight I carried. And somehow, impossibly, we helped each other put it down." He paused, looking at her, at the way the desert sun caught her platinum hair and made it glow like molten silver. "I promise to choose you every day. I promise to make you plain rice and listen to your questionable attempts at melody and argue about sports statistics you insist make no sense. I promise to be honest when I'm scared, and I'm scared a lot, because loving you means having something to lose again. But I promise to love you anyway." Across species, across cultures, across whatever distance the universe puts between us. You are my home. You are my second chance. You are my proof that it's never too late to start living. Sy'ra's skin was brilliant with emotion, cycling through every shade of blue he'd learned to read like a language. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "James Hawthorne, my people have a saying, Thelkai Shenmora. It means the stars brought you to me. We say it to our bonded partners, the ones we believe were written into our fate before we were born. I never thought I would say those words again. I never thought I deserved to. But here you are, and here I am, and the stars have brought us together across impossible odds." She took his hands, and the electric warmth of contact flooded through him. "I promise to wake up beside you every morning and be grateful. I promise to learn your earth customs and teach you mine and laugh at the absurdities of both. I promise to love your daughter and granddaughter as my own. I promise to be patient when you have nightmares, because I have them too, and we will face the dark together. I promise to believe in us even when logic says we shouldn't work. Because love is not logical. It is stubborn and ridiculous and beautiful, just like you." Webb declared them married by the laws of Earth and Xathan, and when they kissed, Sy'ra's skin flared so bright that people shielded their eyes, gasping at the display. In Xathan culture, that level of luminescence meant one thing: perfect joy. The reception was chaos in the best way. Human music and Xathan instruments playing together, creating sounds that had never existed before, harmonies that made James's spine tingle. Food from both worlds, though the Xathan politely declined anything containing meat, and the humans politely declined anything containing fermented moss. Sy'ra ran wild with Xathan children who taught her to play games that involved bioluminescent balls and rules that changed mid-game. Emily gave a toast that had everyone crying, her voice carrying across the garden. "My father was lost for a long time. I thought he was gone forever, but Sy'ra found him, brought him back, gave me my dad again, and gave my daughter the grandfather she deserved. So Sy'ra, thank you. Thank you for loving him. Thank you for saving him. Thank you for showing us all that family is bigger than biology and love is stronger than loss." Dr. Webb gave a toast that had everyone laughing. "I've known James Hawthorne for 5 years. In that time, I've watched him grade papers with the enthusiasm of a man facing execution, attend faculty meetings like he was storming Normandy, and generally emanate an aura of profound dissatisfaction with existence. Then this woman shows up and suddenly he's smiling. gardening, making plans. It's deeply unsettling. Sy'ra, whatever you did to him, please write it down so the rest of us can benefit. Chiron gave a toast in Xathan that the translation devices struggled with, but the gist was clear. You are pack bonded now. May your songs harmonize. May your roots grow deep. May the stars watch over you until the last light fades. It was poetry, and it was beautiful, and when he finished, Sy'ra embraced him and whispered something that made the stern warrior's eyes go soft. As the sun set and the bioluminescent plants grew brighter, James and Sy'ra slipped away from the party. They walked through the garden, hand in hand, not talking, just being together in the golden light of evening. Happy? James asked. Happier than I have ever been. Sy'ra looked up at the first stars beginning to appear. In 2 days, we leave for Xathan. Are you nervous? Terrified, James laughed. I've flown fighter jets in combat and been shot at by people who really wanted me dead. But the thought of meeting your entire planet's worth of in-laws, that's a whole different level of fear. They will love you, or at least they will try. Some of them will struggle with the concept of a human in their midst, but they will see what I see. A good man who loves me, that will be enough. They stood in silence as the sky darkened and the stars came out in full force. Somewhere up there, 40 light years away, was Xathan, the world Sy'ra had come from, the world they would visit together and then leave together because home was no longer a place. It was a person. Tell me about the ship, James said, the one we're taking. It is called the Vel'Shera, the Wandering Star. It is a science vessel normally used for deep space exploration. The journey will take 3 weeks at maximum velocity. We will be in cryosleep for most of it. Will it hurt, the cryosleep? No, you simply close your eyes on Earth and open them near Xathan. Time becomes irrelevant. It is like death, but temporary. That's a hell of a sales pitch. Sy'ra laughed, that rare sound that never failed to make his heart race. I am learning human humor. Am I improving? You're getting there. James pulled her close. 3 weeks. And how long will we stay? As long as you can tolerate. Xathan gravity is 0.8 of Earth normal, so you will feel lighter. The atmosphere has less oxygen, so you will tire more easily. But the technology exists to make you comfortable. We can stay a month, 2 months, as long as you wish. And then we come home. And then we come home, to this desert, to this garden, to Sy'ra and Emily and our strange blended life. She looked up at him, eyes reflecting starlight. Are you ready for this, for all of it? James thought about Margaret, about the permission she'd given him, about the 4 people who'd died under his command and how he'd finally learned to carry their memory without being crushed by it, about Emily's forgiveness and Sy'ra's laughter, and the way the universe kept offering second chances to people who'd given up on deserving them. Yeah, he said, I'm ready. The departure was scheduled for a Tuesday in late June. They would leave from the Xathan compound in Tucson, board a shuttle that would take them to the orbiting ship, and then begin the 3-week journey across the stars. Emily and Sy'ra came to see them off, along with Dr. Webb and half the university faculty. Sy'ra hugged James so hard his ribs creaked. You have to come back, Grandpa. You promised to teach me about constellations. I will, sweetheart, I promise. We'll just be gone a little while. Bring me something cool from the alien planet, Sy'ra said seriously. Like a space rock or a weird plant or something. I'll do my best. Emily's goodbye was harder. She held her father for a long time, neither of them speaking, and James memorized the feeling. The smell of her hair, the sound of her breathing. Finally, she pulled back, wiped her eyes, and said, take care of her, and let her take care of you. I will, James smiled. Thank you, Em, for giving me another chance. Thank you for taking it. The shuttle was sleek and silver, moving with that impossible grace all Xathan technology seemed to possess. James and Sy'ra boarded, took their seats in the passenger compartment that smelled faintly of ozone and something floral, and watched through the viewport as Earth fell away beneath them. The desert, the city, the curve of the planet, all of it shrinking until it was just a blue and white marble against the black. "It's beautiful," James said. "I've seen it before in training, but never like this. Never knowing I was leaving it behind." "We will return," Sy'ra reminded him, her hand finding his. "This is not goodbye. It is simply see you later." The Velshera was enormous, a city in space, with gardens that defied physics and laboratories studying phenomena James couldn't even pronounce, and living quarters for a crew of 300. Most of them were Xathan, but there were a few other species James didn't recognize, beings that looked like they'd evolved in oceans or on worlds with crushing gravity. Everyone was polite, curious about the human who'd married their former ambassador. The cryosleep pods looked like something from a science fiction movie, sleek white coffins with monitoring equipment built into the walls, soft blue lighting that pulsed like a heartbeat. James lay down in his, trying not to think about how much it resembled a sarcophagus. Sy'ra was in the pod next to his, close enough that they could hold hands until the sleep took them. "I love you," she said as the systems began to hum. "I love you too," James replied. "See you on the other side." The cold came gradually, numbing his fingers and toes first, then spreading inward like frost creeping across a window. His vision blurred. Sy'ra's face, luminescent and beautiful, was the last thing he saw before the darkness took him. He dreamed of stars, of falling through space forever, untethered and alone, of Margaret's voice saying, "Don't die with me," live, of Sy'ra's skin glowing in the dark, of Sy'ra's laughter and Emily's forgiveness and all the small moments of joy he'd almost missed by giving up too soon. Of flying his fighter jet one last time, but this time when he pulled the trigger, flowers bloomed instead of fire. When he woke, Sy'ra was standing over his pod, smiling. "Welcome to Xathan," she said. James sat up slowly, his body protesting the movement, muscles stiff from weeks of immobility. Through the viewport, he could see it. A world bathed in the light of 3 suns, one large and yellow, 2 smaller and orange, casting everything in shades of gold and copper. Continents of green and blue, oceans that sparkled like cut gems, cities visible even from orbit, glowing with bioluminescence that made them look like constellations brought to Earth. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "Yes," Sy'ra helped him out of the pod, her touch warm and steadying. "It is, but it is not home anymore. You are home, remember that." They descended to the surface in a smaller shuttle, landing at a spaceport outside the capital city. The gravity was lighter, just as Sy'ra had warned, making James feel like he could jump 10 feet in the air. The air was thinner, making each breath a little less satisfying, like breathing at high altitude. But the sky, the sky was unlike anything he'd ever seen. 3 suns at different points in the heavens, casting multiple shadows, painting everything in layers of gold and copper and rose. Liara was waiting for them at the spaceport, looking older out of hologram, smaller, the purple of her skin faded to almost lavender, but her eyes were fierce as ever. "Sy'ra," she said, "welcome home, and Colonel Hawthorne. Thank you for bringing her back, even if only for a visit." "Thank you for giving her permission to leave in the first place," James said. They stayed at Liara's home, a sprawling structure that had been grown rather than built, living walls that breathed and adapted to their inhabitants, floors that were soft as carpet, but made of some organic material James couldn't identify. He spent the first few days simply trying to process everything. The food was strange, all vegetables and fungi and things he couldn't identify, textures his tongue wasn't designed for. The music was haunting, played on instruments that produced sounds in frequencies that made his bones vibrate, harmonies that seemed to come from inside his skull. The people were polite but distant, curious about him, but unsure how to interact with a human. But James had survived worse than being the outsider. He'd survived Iraq. He'd survived Margaret's death. He'd survived 5 years of wanting to die. A few uncomfortable dinners were nothing. On the 3rd day, something happened that reminded everyone why humans came from a Class 12 death world. They were at a public market, Sy'ra showing James the stalls where vendors sold bioluminescent flowers and crystalline sculptures and foods from across the Xathan territories. James was examining something that looked like a fruit, but pulsed with its own light when he heard screaming. A construction accident. A massive piece of equipment had broken free from its moorings, a metal beam the size of a car tumbling toward a group of Xathan children. The adults were frozen, their reaction times slower than humans, their bodies not built for explosive movement. James didn't think, he just moved. He covered the 20 meters in under 3 seconds, faster than any Xathan could process. Grabbed 2 children, one under each arm, and dove. The beam crashed down exactly where they'd been standing, the impact crater deep enough to have killed them instantly. The market went silent. James stood, set the children down gently, his heart rate barely elevated. The kids stared at him with wide eyes, then at their parents, then burst into tears. An elderly Xathan male stepped forward, silver eyes wide with something between awe and fear. "I have lived 300 years, he said, his voice shaking. "I have never seen anything move that fast. Your reflexes, the speed, the strength to carry both children at once, it is extraordinary." "We're built different," James said simply, checking the kids for injuries. "Where I come from, if you don't move fast, you die. Evolution made us good at not dying." Word spread. By evening, the story had been embellished. The beam larger, the danger greater, James's speed even more impossible. Sy'ra found him in their room, looking uncomfortable with the attention. "They are calling you the Deathworld Man," she said, a smile playing at her lips. "Some are frightened, but most are impressed. You saved those children without hesitation, without expecting reward. That is not the behavior of a monster." "Just did what anyone would do," James muttered. "No, any human would do. But humans are not like other species. That is what they are beginning to understand." Sy'ra took him to her old home, the place she'd lived with Thel'kar and Ryan. It was abandoned now, overgrown with native plants that glowed faintly in the perpetual daylight, but still beautiful in its decay. She showed him the garden where Thel'kar had grown his exotic flowers, blooms that shifted color with the time of day. The room where Ryan had kept his collection of xenobiology specimens, jars still lined up on shelves. The bed where she and Thel'kar had slept for 63 years, now covered in dust that sparkled like diamond powder. "This is where I was happy," she said quietly. "Before the war, before the loss, this is who I was." "And who are you now?" James asked. "Someone different. Someone forged by grief into something harder but also more flexible. Someone who learned that you can honor the past without being trapped by it." She turned to him. "Someone who is ready to build a new home with you." They visited Thel'kar's grave, a simple marker in a cemetery filled with bioluminescent flowers that swayed without wind. James stood back, giving Sy'ra space, but she beckoned him forward. "He should meet you," she said, "even if it is too late for conversation." James knelt beside the grave, placed his hand on the warm stone that still held heat from the 3 suns. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for letting her go, for giving her permission, for understanding that love is about more than possession. I'll take care of her, I promise." The wind rustled through the strange trees, and for a moment, James could have sworn he felt something. A presence, a warmth, and approval, probably just his imagination. But he chose to believe it was real. They attended a ceremony at the Xathan Council, where Liara formally stepped down from all remaining positions of honor. She stood before her people and confessed her crime, not just the false intelligence, but the cowardice of letting someone else bear the blame. The council voted to exile her from public service, but allowed her to keep her property and pension. It was a mercy she didn't ask for and probably didn't deserve, but she accepted it with grace. Afterward, she approached James and Sy'ra. "I have one request," she said. "When you have children, if you have children, let me know them. Let me be part of their lives, even from a distance. I have lost my son and grandson. I would like to know my grandchildren, if I may." Sy'ra looked at James, a question in her eyes. He nodded. "If we have children," James said, "you will know them. We cannot promise more than that, but we can promise that much." "It is more than I deserve," Liara said. "Thank you." The month on Xathan passed in a blur of experiences. James met Sy'ra's old friends, attended concerts where music was performed in frequencies humans couldn't hear, but could feel, visited museums that held artifacts from civilizations that had risen and fallen before Earth had intelligent life. He learned to eat the strange food and appreciate the alien beauty and understand why Sy'ra had needed to leave this place to find herself again. On their last night, they stood on a balcony overlooking the city, watching the three suns set in sequence, painting the sky in colors that had no names in English. Tomorrow, they would board the Velshera and begin the journey home, back to Earth, back to Tucson and the desert and Emily and Sy'ra and the life they were building together. "Any regrets?" Sy'ra asked. James thought about the year that had passed since he'd first seen her walk onto that stage, about everything he'd gained and lost and learned, about the man he'd been and the man he was becoming. "None," he said finally, "not a single one, you. Only that I did not meet you sooner, that we lost so many years to grief and guilt and loneliness. But perhaps we needed those years to become who we needed to be for each other." "Yeah," James agreed. "Maybe we did." They stood in silence as the last sun dipped below the horizon and the bioluminescent flowers began to glow, turning the city into a constellation brought to Earth. Somewhere in the distance, music played, that haunting Xathan melody that sounded like water and wind and something older than memory. "Ready to go home?" James asked. "Yes," Sy'ra leaned into him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Let us return to our desert and our garden and our family. Let us live the rest of our days in that small, perfect space we have carved out together." "How long do you think we have?" James asked. "I'm 68 now. Maybe 20 years if I'm lucky, 30 if I'm very lucky." "And I will be 125 when you are 88, still young by Xathan standards. I will outlive you by decades." She turned to look up at him. "Does that frighten you, knowing I will go on without you?" "Yeah," James admitted, "but not enough to change anything. 20 years with you is worth whatever comes after. And who knows? Maybe you'll surprise me and die of old age right alongside me, just to prove the universe wrong about something." Sy'ra laughed. "I like that plan better. Let us aim for that." The journey back was the same as the journey out. 3 weeks in cryosleep, dreamless and cold. But when James woke this time, when he saw Earth through the viewport, blue and white and achingly familiar, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. The deep certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. The shuttle touched down in Tucson on a bright August morning, the heat already shimmering off the tarmac. Emily and Sy'ra were waiting, along with half the city it seemed. News crews, university faculty, curious onlookers who wanted to see the couple who'd traveled to another world and come back. James ignored all of them. He scooped Sy'ra up in his arms, the lighter Xathan gravity still in his muscles making her feel like she weighed nothing, and spun her around until she shrieked with laughter. "I brought you something from Xathan," he said, pulling a small crystal from his pocket. It glows in the dark. The Zathan use them for meditation. It's so pretty. Sy'ra held it up to the light, watching it sparkle with inner fire. Did you see aliens? Besides Sy'ra, I mean. Lots of aliens. Some of them looked like trees. Some of them could fly. One of them had 6 eyes and could see in every direction at once. That's so cool. Sy'ra hugged him tight. I'm glad you came back, Grandpa. Me too, sweetheart, me too. Emily hugged him next, then Sy'ra, and the 3 of them stood together in the desert sun while cameras flashed and people asked questions they didn't answer. Finally, Dr. Webb pushed through the crowd, looking annoyed. Enough, he barked at the press, his British accent cutting through the noise. They just traveled 40 light years. Give them some bloody space. The crowd dispersed reluctantly. Webb ushered them to his car, drove them back to the house James and Sy'ra shared. Inside, everything was exactly as they'd left it. The coffee maker on the counter, the books on the shelves, the garden visible through the window, tomatoes growing wild, vines climbing the fence. Home, Sy'ra said softly. Yeah, James agreed. Home. That night, they lay in bed, too tired to do anything but hold each other and be grateful they'd survived the journey. Through the window, stars scattered across the sky, and somewhere among them, 40 light years away, was Zathan. The world Sy'ra had come from. The world they'd visited together and left together. Tell me something, James said into the darkness. Do you think Thel'kar knew? When he gave us his blessing, do you think he knew we'd make it? That we'd actually build something that lasted? I think he hoped, Sy'ra said. Hope is different than knowledge, but sometimes it is enough. James thought about that. About hope as a radical act in a universe that offered no guarantees. About choosing to believe in good outcomes even when logic suggested otherwise. About Margaret and Thel'kar, 2 ghosts who'd given them permission to live, and how that gift was maybe the greatest love of all. I'm going to say something crazy, he said. More crazy than marrying an alien you'd known for a month. Way more crazy. James took a breath. I want kids. With you, I know the biology is impossible and I'm 68 years old and it makes no sense, but I want to try anyway. Sy'ra was silent for so long he thought she'd fallen asleep. Then, the biology is not impossible. Difficult, yes. It would require genetic engineering, artificial gestation, technology that makes humans uncomfortable, but possible. You've thought about this. Every day since Thel'kar asked us to name a child after Ryan. She turned to face him in the darkness, her skin providing just enough light to see by. I am 106 years old. By Zathan standards, I have decades left to bear children if I choose. The question is whether you want to be a father again at your age. James thought about Emily, about the mistakes he'd made raising her, about Sy'ra and the joy of being a grandfather, about the chance to do it right this time, with wisdom earned through failure. Yeah, he said, I do, if you do, if we can make it work. Then we will try. Not now. Give us a year to simply be married, to enjoy each other, to build our foundation. And then we will talk to the scientists and see what is possible. Deal, James said, and sealed it with a kiss. The year passed like the best kind of dream. They settled into routines, the small domesticities that make a life. Morning coffee, James making it strong enough to wake the dead while Sy'ra winced. Evening walks through the desert, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of fire. Weekly dinners with Emily and Sy'ra, Sy'ra teaching Sy'ra about earth animals while Sy'ra taught her about Zathan constellations. Monthly visits from Dr. Webb, who pretended to be annoyed but clearly enjoyed the company, and who had started dating a librarian, much to everyone's delight. James retired from teaching, spent his days writing a book about his experiences. Not a memoir exactly, more of a meditation on loss and love, and the courage it takes to start over when you're convinced you're too old for new beginnings. Sy'ra worked as a consultant for the Xathan delegation, helping smooth the continuing integration between their species and humanity. They talked to the scientists, learned that yes, human and Xathan DNA could be combined through careful genetic engineering, that the resulting embryo would need to be gestated in an artificial womb for safety, that the child would be something new, a bridge between two species, carrying the best and worst of both. They decided to try. The process took 6 months. Genetic material from both of them, combined and adjusted and coaxed into viability. Weekly appointments to monitor progress, watching cells divide and differentiate on screens that showed life being built from scratch. Discussions about names, about how to raise a child who would be neither fully human nor fully Xathan, but something in between. And then, on a spring morning 13 months after they'd returned from Xathan, the call came. The gestation was complete. Their child was ready. They went to the medical facility together, hand in hand, terrified and elated in equal measure. The artificial womb was a marvel of Xathan biotechnology, a transparent sphere filled with nutrient fluid, and inside it was a baby. Tiny, perfect, with skin that was pale blue fading to pink at the extremities, hair that was platinum blonde, eyes that opened and showed irises of deep purple with flecks of gray like storm clouds. Their son. He's beautiful, Emily whispered. She'd come with them, along with Sy'ra, to meet the newest member of their impossible family. He's perfect, Sy'ra said, her skin glowing so bright the room was bathed in blue light. The technician opened the womb carefully, lifted the baby out with practiced hands, cleaned him and wrapped him and placed him in Sy'ra's arms. He was quiet, alert, looking around at the world with ancient eyes that suggested he'd been waiting for this moment, that he knew exactly where he was supposed to be. "Hello, Ryan," Sy'ra said softly. "Welcome to the universe. You are so very loved." James looked at his son, at this small miracle who shouldn't exist but did anyway, and felt something in his chest that he'd thought was dead forever. Not hope. Not anymore. Something bigger. The absolute certainty that life was worth living, that love was worth fighting for, that it was never, ever too late to begin again. "Can I hold him?" he asked. Sy'ra placed Ryan in his arms, and the baby looked up at him with those hybrid eyes and made a small sound that might have been recognition, or might have been just a baby being a baby. James didn't care. He was a father again at 69 years old, and it was terrifying and wonderful and exactly right. "Hi, kid," he whispered. "I'm your dad. I'm going to do my best not to screw this up." Ryan grabbed his finger with a grip that was surprisingly strong, and James felt tears running down his face. Happy tears. The kind he'd thought he'd never cry again. Emily put her hand on his shoulder. "You're going to be great, Dad. You've learned from your mistakes. That's all any of us can do." Sy'ra peered at her new uncle with intense curiosity. "He's so tiny. Can I teach him stuff when he gets bigger?" "Absolutely," Sy'ra said. "You will be the best cousin anyone could ask for." They brought Ryan home to the house in Tucson, to the garden where tomatoes grew and bioluminescent flowers glowed in the dark. They set up a nursery that mixed earth and Xathan elements, a crib that monitored vitals and played music in 2 languages, walls painted with murals of both worlds, 2 suns on one side and 3 on the other. The first few months were exhausting in the way that all new parenthood is exhausting. Sleepless nights and endless feedings and the constant low-grade terror that they were doing something wrong. But they had help. Emily came over regularly, bringing her medical expertise and her maternal wisdom. Chiron visited weekly, teaching them Xathan child-rearing practices with surprising gentleness. Dr. Webb showed up with British children's books and terrible advice that usually made them laugh. Ryan grew fast, the hybrid genetics giving him advantages of both species. He could sense emotions through touch like the Xathen, but also had the human capacity for rapid learning and pattern recognition. His skin would glow when he was happy, darken when he was sad, and he picked up language at an astonishing rate, speaking his first words in both English and Xathen before he was 6 months old. On Ryan's first birthday, they had a party in the garden. Both families, both worlds represented. Emily and Sy'ra, Dr. Webb and his librarian girlfriend, half the Xathen delegation. Liara attended via hologram from Xathen, watching her grandson with tears in her silver eyes. "He looks like his namesake," she said to Sy'ra, "but he has your spirit. Strong and stubborn and ready to fight the universe if it gets in his way." "He is perfect," Sy'ra agreed, "and he is proof that something good can come from tragedy. That love is stronger than loss." After everyone left, after Ryan was asleep in his crib, James and Sy'ra sat in the garden and watched the stars come out. They'd been married for 2 years now, together for just over 3. In that time, they'd traveled across the galaxy, buried the dead, built a family, and created a life that shouldn't have been possible but was. "Tell me something," Sy'ra said. "If you could go back to that night in the bar before you met me, knowing everything that would happen, would you still do it? Would you still take the risk?" James didn't hesitate. In a heartbeat, every moment, every complication, every impossible choice. "I'd do it all again just to end up here with you." Even the hard parts, watching Thel'kar die, facing the council, traveling to Xathen knowing you might never want to return to Earth. Especially the hard parts, because they're what made this precious. He gestured to the house, to the garden, to the life they'd built. "If it had been easy, we wouldn't appreciate it as much." "You have become very wise in your old age." "Old age? I'm 70. That's barely middle-aged for someone who plans to live forever out of spite." Sy'ra laughed, that sound that still made his heart race after all this time. "I love you, James Hawthorne. I love you more than I loved Thel'kar, though I never thought that would be possible. You have given me everything. A home, a family, a reason to wake up excited for tomorrow. Thank you." "Thank you for finding me," James said. "Thank you for seeing past the broken parts to whatever was still salvageable underneath. Thank you for being patient while I learned how to be human again." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, watching the stars wheel overhead in their eternal patterns. Somewhere up there, 40 light-years away, Xathen orbited its 3 suns. And here on Earth, in a desert garden in Tucson, Arizona, 2 people from different worlds built a life together, one small moment at a time. Inside, Ryan woke from his nap and started to cry. James and Sy'ra stood together, moved toward the house, and for just a moment, James caught their reflection in the window. An old man and an alien woman, walking side by side, moving toward the sound of their son's voice. It was the most ordinary moment imaginable. It was also a miracle. That night, after Ryan was fed and changed and back to sleep, after Sy'ra had gone to bed, and James was alone with his thoughts, he stood in the doorway of the nursery and watched his son breathe. This small, perfect, hybrid child who represented the impossible made real. He thought about Margaret, about the permission she'd given him, about the 4 people who'd died under his command and how he'd finally learned to honor them by living fully. About Thel'kar, who'd survived 20 years of darkness just to set Sy'ra free. About Emily's forgiveness and Sy'ra's laughter and all the small miracles that had conspired to bring him here. And he thought about tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the days stretching out ahead of him. Days he would spend with Sy'ra and Ryan, and the family they'd created from broken pieces and impossible odds. Days he would spend being grateful, being present, being alive. It was enough, more than enough, it was everything. In the morning, he would wake beside his wife and make strong coffee and listen to her hum off-key while she cooked breakfast. Ryan would babble in 2 languages, and his skin would glow with happiness when James picked him up. Emily would call to check in. Sy'ra would text asking if she could come over after school. It would be ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. A life built across species and stars and every reasonable objection anyone could raise. A life that existed because two broken people had chosen each other and kept choosing each other every day after that. James Hawthorne had been a lot of things in his 70 years. A soldier, a pilot, a husband, a father, a drunk, a grieving widower waiting to die. And now, finally, he was something else, something better. He was a man who had learned that it was never too late, that love could span galaxies, that forgiveness was possible, that second chances were real, that family was what you built, not what you were born into, that home was wherever your heart could rest. He was alive, truly, completely, impossibly alive, and it was beautiful. Outside, the stars watched over the desert garden where a human man and a Xathan woman had built their home, where their hybrid sons slept peacefully, dreaming whatever dreams bridge children dream, where tomorrow was waiting with all its ordinary miracles and impossible joys. Across the stars, against all odds, they had found each other, and that made all the difference.